You arrive at the residence of Lady Shonagon on a morning in the 12th month, when frost clings to every pine needle and the breath of the oxen at the gate fades in pale clouds. The path through the outer courtyard is dusted with a fine dry snow that crunches softly under your straw sandals, a sound so faint it vanishes into the rustle of servants sweeping the covered walkway. You are the court scribe, called here to keep the household accounts throughout the coming year, and today is the first quiet page of that long duty. A maid leads you through a narrow corridor where sliding screens of pale paper filter the winter light into a soft grey glow. You pass a room where women sit mending robes, their needles dipping and rising with a rhythm as steady as the slow drip of melting icicles outside. In the small chamber assigned to you, a low writing desk of dark, aged palinea wood waits beneath a window facing the inner garden. The desk holds a ledger made of mulberry fibre pages bound with twisted hemp cord, a stone inkstone with a shallow well, an inkstick wrapped in oiled paper, a water dropper shaped like a tiny gourd, and a fresh brush with a bamboo handle and pale deer hair tip resting on a porcelain rest. The only other objects are a brazier filled with ash and a few pieces of charcoal arranged beside it, and a cushion of layered hemp cloth set before the desk. You settle onto the cushion, adjusting your robe so the cold does not seep too quickly through the fabric, and take a moment simply to observe the space. The garden beyond the window is a composition of white and grey, snow mounded on the curved roof of a small storehouse, snow balanced along the branches of a bare plum tree, snow flattening the moss beside a stone lantern whose cap wears a thick white hat. The scene is motionless, holding its breath, and the stillness flows inward until it fills the room like another presence. Before any writing begins, you must prepare the ink. You lift the inkstick from its wrapper and pour a small amount of clean water from the gourd-shaped dropper into the well of the inkstone. The water makes a tiny tapping sound as it hits the stone, then settles into silence. Holding the inkstick upright, you begin to grind it in slow, even circles against the stone surface, moving your wrist without hurry. The inkstick glides with a soft liquid whisper, gradually releasing a dark bloom of pine soot and binding gum into the water. As the rubbing continues, a scent rises, cool and faintly woody, reminiscent of old temple halls and the smoke of sacred incense mixing with the dampness of the winter air. Minutes pass while the ink thickens from a watery grey to a deep, glossy black, pooling at the edge of the well like a miniature lake of shadow. You test the consistency by lifting the brush, touching just the tip to the liquid, and watching how the ink clings without beading or running. Satisfied, you set the inkstick aside on a small clay dish and unroll the ledger to its first blank page. The page is a soft cream color, with fine horizontal lines of fiber visible when you tilt it toward the light. The surface is smooth, but not slippery, offering a gentle resistance that will hold each brushstroke cleanly. You place a paperweight, a simple river stone, along the top edge to keep the page flat, then align the brush with the upper right corner where the records traditionally begin. The first entry must note the date, the 15th day of the 12th month, in the first year of the Chotoku era, and beneath it a heading in slightly larger characters reading Household Expenses for the latter half of the 12th month. The brush moves slowly, each stroke a sequence of pressing, pulling, and lifting, the hairs spreading and gathering again with a tiny spring. The ink settles into the fibers, drying almost instantly in the cool air, leaving behind the crisp shape of each character. Now the ledger requires its first actual item of expense. The household has purchased 3 new charcoal braziers for the main hall, where guests are sometimes received even in the cold season, and for the private quarters, where the lady and her attendants sit during the long evenings. You have before you several thin wooden tally sticks, each marked with notches representing quantities, and short written notes in abbreviated script indicating what was bought and in what amount. The tally sticks for the braziers show a count of 3, and the price paid in copper coins, 240 copper cash per brazier, each brazier made of unglazed reddish earthenware with a simple curved rim. You dip the brush again and write the description first, forming the characters for charcoal brazier, then the number 3, then the price per unit, and the total sum of 720 copper cash. Below this line, you add a note specifying that the braziers were purchased from the kiln east of the river, carried by one of the household porters and inspected by the head maid for cracks before acceptance. The brushwork is deliberate. The strokes of the numerals require less pressure than the detailed ideographs for the object itself, and the ink remains steady as you complete the entry with a small circle to indicate verification. You set the brush down across the rest, its tip glistening faintly, and reach for the next tally stick. This stick is thinner, almost a sliver of cypress, and records an order for reed mats for the servants' sleeping quarters along the western side of the compound. The existing mats had grown thin and frayed over the previous season, and the cold creeping through the floorboards made new coverings a necessity. The notches and abbreviated script tell you that 12 reed mats were woven by a local mat maker, using common river reeds gathered in the autumn and dried under the eaves of the weaver's shed. Each mat cost 1 bolt of medium-grade hemp cloth, equivalent of 40 copper cash if one wished to reckon in coin. You record the item carefully. 12 reed mats, plain weave, for the Western Servants' Hall. You then inscribe the unit price, 1 bolt of hemp cloth per mat, and the total, noting that the cloth was taken from the household's own stores, and that the storekeeper has been informed to deduct the 12 bolts from the textile inventory. The brush hesitates only once, when a small droplet of ink gathers at the tip and threatens to fall. You wipe it against the inkstone's rim and continue, finishing the entry with the same verification circle, small and perfectly round. After the mats, you take a short pause. Your legs have grown slightly stiff from sitting, so you shift your weight, resettling the cushion beneath you. Outside, the snow has begun falling again, not heavily, but in small, hesitant flakes that wander down without urgency. A maid passes the open corridor carrying a lacquered tray with a steaming pot, and the soft clink of the lid reaches you before the scent of herbal tea drifts in and fades. You do not rise. Instead, you pour a few more drops of water into the inkstone's well, because the ink has thickened slightly from exposure, and you grind the ink stick for another few minutes, restoring the liquid to its proper flowing consistency. The repetitive motion of the grinding, the gentle scrape and slide, settles into your bones like a quiet mantra. The third tally stick of the morning concerns a smaller, domestic repair. A silk sleeve on one of the noblewoman's informal winter robes are torn along the seam near the elbow, snagged perhaps on a standing screen's edge or a drawer pull. The tally notes that a seamstress was called from the weaver's quarter, a woman skilled in invisible mending, and that the materials used were a length of matching silk thread, a tiny amount of rice paste to hold the weave, and a new inner lining patch cut from an old kimono too worn for further use. The cost is modest. The thread was valued at 12 copper cash, the seamstress's labor at 25 copper cash for a half-day's work, and the patch was taken from the rag basket at no recorded expense because it fell below the threshold for inventory. You enter the items line by line, the thread, the labor, and then a note that the mended robe was examined under lamplight. The tear now invisible, the fabric smoothed and pressed with a warm clothes iron filled with sand. As you write the characters for silk sleeve repair, you picture the seamstress's needle moving in and out, the tiny stitches vanishing into the dyed fabric, the slow pat of her fingers testing the strength of the mend. With the 3 tallied expenses recorded, you turn your attention to the structure of the ledger itself. Every entry must be cross-referenced with the tally sticks, which will later be stored in a small cedar box on the shelf behind you. You count the sticks you have used, 3, matching the 3 entries. You tie them together with a short piece of twisted paper cord and place them in the box, the wood clacking lightly against others already there from previous months, before your arrival. Then you return to the page and, using a finer brush, add marginal notes in red ink prepared from crushed safflower petals, marking each entry's category: furnishings for the braziers, bedding for the reed mats, and clothing repair for the sleeve. The red marks stand out against the black characters like small guiding stars, orderly and silent. The light from the window has shifted while you worked. The earlier grey-white glow has deepened into a dimmer, bluer cast as the afternoon advances toward evening. The charcoal in the brazier burns low, the embers pulsing with a quiet orange heartbeat, and you feel the chill beginning to creep back along the floor. You take a moment to rub your hands together, then rise, step to the brazier, and add 2 fresh lumps of charcoal with the iron tongs left beside it, carefully placing them so they settle into the ash and catch the remaining heat. A thin curl of smoke rises, bringing the faint, dry scent of charcoal dust and burning wood, then dissipates toward the high ceiling beams. Back at the desk, you examine the day's work. The page now holds 3 clean entries, each with its price, quantity, and provenance, each verified and marked. No errors mar the surface, the ink shows no smudges, and the column of figures aligns neatly down the page as if drawn along an invisible line. You allow yourself a slow, deep breath that fobs briefly in the cold air before vanishing. The satisfaction is not a feeling of pride, nothing so sharp, but rather the gentle settling of order onto a small corner of the world, as quiet as the snow layering the garden outside. Before ending the session, you perform the small rituals of maintenance that will allow tomorrow's work to begin without delay. You rinse the brush first, dipping it into a small bowl of clean water you keep beside the desk, swirling it gently until no trace of ink remains among the hairs. You dab the brush dry on a scrap of cloth, reshaping the tip with your fingers so it will not splay, and lay it back on its porcelain rest. Next, you pour the remaining liquid from the inkstone's well into a waste pot, then wipe the stone with a damp cloth, removing the dried flecks of ink and restoring its grey surface to a smooth, matte finish. You wrap the ink stick in its oiled paper and tuck it into a small wooden case, the lid fitting snugly. Finally, you close the ledger, aligning the pages carefully so the edges are flush, and place it on the corner of the desk beneath the paperweight. The last thing you hear before leaving the chamber is the faint crinkle of the mulberry pages settling against the hem binding, a sound like the whisper of autumn leaves long after they have fallen, and the softer, steady hiss of snow against the paper window. The tally sticks in their box rest silently, the brazier glows in the dimness, and everything waits, perfectly still, for the next morning's ink. The first month arrives in the household of Lady Shonagon, not as a bang, but as a gradual softening, a slow loosening of winter's hold that begins one morning when the eaves begin to drip. You notice it on the first day you return to the writing chamber after the 12th month's end. The icicles that hung rigid for weeks now glisten with a thin film of melting water, and a gentle, rhythmic tink sounds from the roof edge, as droplets fall onto the wooden planks below. The air still carries a sharp chill, but somewhere behind it a faint dampness hints at the turning season. You pause in the corridor to watch a single drop run down an icicle's length, gathering light before it detaches and vanishes into a dark patch on the ground. Then you slide the chamber door open and enter. The room has been prepared while you were away. Fresh charcoal glows in the brazier, and the ash has been sifted smooth. The writing desk waits exactly as you left it, the ledger still closed beneath the river stone paperweight, the brush clean on its rest, and the inkstones well dry and empty. On a small tray beside the desk, a maid has placed a new bundle of tally sticks, tied with a strand of rice straw cord. These ones freshly cut from pale cypress and notched by the household steward for the New Year expenses that now require your transcription. You settle onto the cushion, adjusting your sleeves, and begin the morning by pouring water from the gourd dropper into the inkstone's well. 3 measured drops that spread and settle. The inkstick, still wrapped in its oiled paper, is cool to the touch. You unwrap it and set it against the stone, beginning the slow circular grind that draws forth the deep black ink. As the minutes pass, a scent drifts into the room, faint and resinous. The smell of burnt pine from the main hearth where the kitchen staff have been roasting rice cakes on skewers for the household's private New Year observances. The smoke creeps along the corridors like a familiar ghost, merging with the ink's cool mineral notes and the dampness from the garden. When the ink reaches the proper thickness, you unroll the ledger to a fresh page and write the date, the 7th day of the 1st month. Beneath it, you add a heading for New Year ritual expenses, the characters drawn with the same unhurried precision as before. The first tally stick from the bundle is thicker than the ones you handled in the 12th month, its notches indicating a large quantity of glutinous rice purchased for the ceremonial rice cakes, known as mochi, that are essential to the New Year celebrations. The steward's abbreviated script tells you that the household ordered rice from the central granary, paying not in coin but in unhulled rice from the lady's own estate stores. The numbers are clean. 30 bales of polished glutinous rice were delivered by 2 ox carts over a period of 3 days, each bale weighing roughly 60 kin, and the total cost amounted to 45 cocoa of unhulled rice, a standard exchange that the granary accepts at a fixed rate of 3 parts unhulled to 2 parts polished. You dip the brush and record the item carefully, first describing the rice, then the quantity, the unit, and the total price. Your brushstrokes forming the characters for ceremonial rice cake supply, with small, even movements. Below the line, you add a note specifying that the rice was pounded into dough by the kitchen staff on the 5th day using a large wooden mortar and mallet, the rhythmic thud of which you recall hearing faintly through the walls while you were grinding your ink that morning. The entry ends with the verification circle. You set down the brush and let your gaze drift toward the window. Beyond the paper panes, the sky has paled from a winter grey to something closer to pearl, with a wash of apricot near the horizon where the sun, still low and weak, begins to warm the lattice doors of the east-facing rooms in the main residence. The sliding screens are partially open there, and you can see a sliver of a maid's sleeve as she moves along the veranda, shaking out a cushion. The icicles along your own eaves continue their slow drip, each drop marking a steady beat that you have already incorporated into the rhythm of your work without conscious effort. You turn back to the desk. The second tally stick is thinner and carries the mark for salt. Ritual purification salt, a fine white salt gathered from the beaches of the western coast and transported inland in small clay jars, stoppered with wax, was purchased in the last days of the 12th month to be scattered at the corners of the main hall and the entrance gate on New Year's morning, a practice meant to cleanse the space of lingering impurities from the old year. The steward's notation indicates that 3 jars were bought, each jar containing roughly 2 show of salt and costing 42 copper cash. The total expense of 126 copper cash was paid to a traveling salt merchant who set up a stall near the eastern market for the winter season. You record the item with the same attention. Purification salt, fine white, 3 jars. You write the unit price, the total, and a note that the salt was inspected by the lady's personal attendant, who confirmed its color and dryness before the jars were accepted. The brush slides over the page, and you notice that the red safflower ink you used for marginal categories in the previous month has dried in its small pot. You make a mental note to refresh it later, then continue the entry, marking it under the category Ritual Offerings, with a small dot of leftover ink from the main well. Between entries, you take a moment to tend the brazier. The charcoal has burned down to a bed of white-flecked embers, and the room's warmth is thinning. You use the iron tongs to select 2 fresh lumps from the clay pot beside the brazier, each lump dark and lightweight, textured with tiny pores where sap once bubbled in the kiln. You place them carefully on the embers, and after a brief pause, tiny orange flames flicker to life around their edges, licking upward with a low, steady sound. The scent of fresh charcoal mingles with the lingering pine smoke, and the warmth returns in slow waves, easing the slight stiffness in your writing fingers. Now the third tally stick, the one you have left for last because it carries the most human detail, awaits your attention. This stick records the hiring of a dancing girl for the household's private New Year celebration, an entertainment arranged by Lady Shainagon for the women of the residence on the 2nd evening of the month. The dancing girl, a young woman named Tsubaki from the licensed district near 5th Avenue, performed a single dance known as the Willow Sleeve Dance in the main hall before a small audience of the lady and her intimate attendants. The steward's note records the agreed salary, 3 bolts of medium-grade hemp cloth, a payment considered appropriate for an evening's performance of that nature, along with an additional small bundle of rice cakes wrapped in bamboo leaves for the girl to take with her when the night ended. You examine the notches on the stick, verifying the count of 3 bolts and the supplementary item, then begin to write. You describe the expense as entertainment, dancing girl, 1 evening, willow sleeve dance in the main hall. The unit of payment is listed as 3 bolts of hemp cloth, valued at roughly 150 copper cash if one were to convert, though no actual coins changed hands because the cloth came from the household textile stores. Below this, you record the supplementary rice cakes as a separate line, noting their value is equivalent to 1/10 of a bale of glutinous rice, drawn from the same New Year supply you have already recorded. The brush traces the characters smoothly, and a quiet image forms in your mind as you work. The dancing girl in a long-sleeved robe, dyed a pale mauve, moving her fan in slow arcs, while a single hand drum marked the rhythm somewhere off in the dim lamplight. The whole scene drifting past like a boat on still water, without climax, only the quiet unfolding of a tradition. You verify the entry, adding the red category mark for ceremonial entertainment, and then set the tally stick aside with the others. The bundle now has 3 sticks tied with the same rice straw cord, and you place them in the cedar box on the shelf, where they join the sticks from the previous month in a growing archive of spent wood. The box's lid fits with a soft clatter, and for a moment the room holds a complete stillness. The afternoon light has shifted, the apricot tint is burned away to a clear, pale gold that falls across the garden in long, thin rectangles cast by the latticed screens. The icicles, thinner now than they were in the morning, continue their patient drip, each droplet catching the light as it falls and disappearing into the dark earth below the veranda. You pour a few more drops of water into the inkstone and grind a small amount of fresh ink, just enough to complete any remaining notes, and then you open the ledger once more to add a concluding line at the bottom of the day's entries. A simple summation. Total expenses for the New Year ritual period: 45 cocoa unhulled rice, 126 copper cash, 3 bolts of hemp cloth, and rice cakes equivalent to 1/10 baled glutinous rice. The figures aligned neat in that their money and satisfied, you proceed with the closing rituals. The brush is rinsed in the water bowl, swirled until the water runs clear, and then dabbed on the cloth and reshaped. The inkstone is wiped with the damp cloth, the remaining liquid tipped into the waste pot, and the inkstick wrapped and returned to its wooden case. You close the ledger, aligning the pages so the edges are flush, and place the paperweight on top. The chamber falls quiet except for the faint crackle of the embers and the distant, rhythmic tapping of the kitchen mallet, perhaps still pounding rice cakes, a sound as steady as a heartbeat carried through wooden beams. Before leaving, you stand at the window for a moment, not in contemplation, but simply to observe the last of the daylight draining from the garden. The stone lantern wears no snow now, only a damp cap of darker grey, and the moss at its base shows patches of vivid green where the melt has reached it. A single bird, a sparrow, lands on the bare plum branch, tilts its head, and flies off without a sound. The scent of burnt pine has faded, replaced by the cooler, cleaner smell of wet earth and the distant tang of the kitchen's evening broth beginning to simmer. The first month's expenses are complete, the ledger rests, and the house settles into the quiet rhythm of the lengthening days. You slide the door open and step into the corridor, leaving the room to its silence. The tally sticks counted, the ink dry, the year's second chapter already closed. The second month arrives without announcement, slipping into the capital like a slow exhalation of warmer air that stirs the plum branches and scatters the last patches of snow into damp shadows beneath the storehouse. You notice the change first on your morning walk to the writing chamber, when the gravel of the garden path yields softly underfoot rather than crunching with frost, and the scent in the air shifts from the clean nothing of winter to a faint earthy sweetness of mud and sprouting things. A haze of green appears at the tips of the willow near the gate, and inside the residence the maids open the sliding screens a hand's width wider each day to let the new light flood the corridors. In your chamber, the brazier still holds coals, but you have reduced the amount from 3 lumps to 2, and soon you will set it aside entirely until the 10th month. The window now reveals a garden transformed. The bare plum tree is broken into pale pink blossoms that quiver without sound in the light breeze, and the moss around the stone lantern has deepened into a thick velvet of emerald. The birds have returned and exchanged simple calls through the morning, though their song never rises above a gentle chitter that merges with the distant clatter of the kitchen staff preparing the morning gruel. You sit at the desk and unroll the ledger to a new spread of pages, the mulberry paper cool, but no longer chill to the touch. A fresh bundle of tally sticks lies tied with a strand of indigo-dyed cord, signaling the steward's awareness that a new season of expenses has begun. The inkstone is dry, and you fill the well with 3 drops from the water dropper, the water beading and then settling. The inkstick, unwrapped, grinds in slow circles, releasing its deep black stain into the water, and as you work, the same faint woody scent rises, now joined by the delicate perfume of plum blossoms drifting through the window. The second and third months mark the beginning of the silkworm season, and the household's attention turns to the raising of the tiny larvae whose thread will eventually become the fabric for the noblewoman's summer robes. The first tally stick reflects this shift. It records the purchase of mulberry leaves, the sole food of the silkworms, in quantities large enough to sustain the first batch of eggs, now stirring in the rearing shed. The steward's notation indicates that 20 large baskets of fresh mulberry leaves were acquired from a farmstead along the Kamo River, each basket measuring roughly 1.5 shaku across, and filled to the brim with tender young leaves still carrying the morning dew. The price was paid in copper cash at a rate of 15 coins per basket for a total of 300 copper coins, and the leaves were transported by hand in 2 trips by a household servant who left before dawn and returned by midday. You dip the brush and write the entry clearly, forming the characters for mulberry leaf silkworm feed, followed by the quantity, unit price, and total. Below this, you add a note that the leaves were inspected by the worm tender for freshness, and that the inspection rejected 3 leaves with brown spots, which were removed before the leaves were spread on the rearing trays. The mention of the rearing trays brings you to the second tally stick, which is longer and notched with a purchase of equipment rather than consumables. New wooden trays made of untreated hinoki wood were ordered from a carpenter in the southern ward to replace older trays that had warped or cracked during the previous season's use. The steward records that 8 trays were made, each one rectangular and shallow with raised rims no higher than the width of a finger, designed to allow the worms space to feed while preventing them from wandering. The carpenter's fee was 3 copper coins per tray, a modest price reflecting the simple joinery, bringing the total to 24 copper coins, and the wood was provided by the household from its own supply of seasoned hinoki planks stored in the tool shed. You enter the item, wooden rearing trays, hinoki, 8 units. You note the price, the provision of materials, and the delivery date, adding that the old trays were broken down and used as kindling for the kitchen fire, so no waste occurred. The brush moves with the same steady rhythm, and the page absorbs the ink without a single smudge. The third tally stick of the silkworm batch concerns the wages of the worm tender herself, a quiet woman named Sada, who has served the household during the spring season for the past 6 years, and whose hands, roughened and careful, can separate the tiny worms from their spent leaves without harming a single thread. Her wage for the full 2 months of the second and third months is set at 6 koku of unhulled rice, a standard payment for seasonal labor of this skill, along with a daily allowance of 1 small bowl of the same morning gruel that the kitchen prepares for the servants. The steward's stick notes that Sada will also receive an extra length of plain cotton cloth for a new work apron at the end of the season, though that expense is to be recorded later, not now. You write the wage entry, worm tender Sada, seasonal wage, 6 koku unhulled rice, plus daily gruel and a cotton apron to be issued. The characters for her name come slowly, as you are careful to use the correct ones she herself uses, drawn with slightly less pressure so they do not overpower the numerical records. You add the verification circle and set the stick aside, then tie the 3 silkworm-related sticks together with a piece of twisted paper cord before placing them in the cedar box. Now a different kind of tally stick, thinner and marked with charcoal rather than knife cuts, draws your attention. It records a household repair in the north wing, where the edging of several tatami mats has frayed from years of foot traffic. The mats themselves are still sound, their woven rush surfaces intact, but the dark fabric borders that frame each mat have begun to unthread, leaving small gaps where dust accumulates. The steward ordered a replacement of the edging for 4 mats in the corridor outside the storage rooms. A tatami maker from the artisan district was hired for the task, and he supplied the black-dyed hemp fabric, cutting and stitching it to each mat on site. The cost is listed as 30 copper cash per mat for the labor, with the fabric priced separately at 50 copper cash for the entire length needed. You record the expense. North wing tatami edging replacement, 4 mats. Beneath, you detail the labor cost, the fabric cost, and the total of 170 copper cash, noting that the work took 1 full afternoon and that the old edging fabric was discarded. The brush paints the character for tatami with its distinctive strokes, and you feel a small satisfaction in its correct form. As you finish the tatami entry, a scent wafts through the chamber. The kitchen shed has begun boiling the morning gruel, a simple porridge of rice and water, and its mild, starchy smell drifts along the corridor with a dependability that tells you the hour has advanced to mid-morning. The sound reaches you as well, the low bubbling of the great iron pot over the fire, a noise so constant and unchanging that it becomes a kind of silence after a while. The same way the silkworms rustle in the rearing shed would later fill the afternoons. The thought of the silkworms brings a quiet interlude in your record-keeping. You set down the brush and walk to the window, not out of distraction, but from the practical need to rest your eyes from the page's white surface. In the garden, the plum blossoms are losing their petals now, the pale pink discs falling one by one and dotting the moss-like confetti. A maid passes beneath the tree, carrying a basket of wet laundry destined for the drying lines behind the kitchen, and her wooden clogs make a soft, hollow clopping on the stone path. You watch without expectation, simply noting the slow ballet of the season, then return to the desk and pour a few more drops of water into the inkstone, grinding a small addition of ink for the next entry. The sixth tally stick is a small one, barely the length of a finger, recording a minor purchase of dye for some sleeve linings meant for the upcoming warm weather. Lady Shonagon had requested a specific shade of willow green for the inside of her new informal robe, a color that required a blend of indigo and gardenia pods to achieve the desired pale, fresh tone. The dyer near the Eastern Market mixed a small batch of the dye in a ceramic pot, and the household purchased enough for 3 linings at a price of 10 copper cash per batch, with an additional 5 cash for the mixing agent made from crushed alum. The total of 35 copper cash seems small compared to the larger expenses, but you record it with the same care, writing dye, willow green, for 3 sleeve linings, and noting the components and their costs. The tiny brush stroke for the numeral 5 nearly disappears into the paper's fiber, a miniature mark that holds its own precise meaning. After the dye entry, you turn the page halfway to check the growing column of figures, your eye tracing the lines of black characters without reading them individually. The pattern is orderly, each expense placed in its proper sequence by date and category, and the red marginal marks you refreshed at the start of the month stand out clearly, guiding the eye from foodstuffs to equipment to labor to repairs. You allow yourself a slow breath, then re-dip the brush. A second household repair, this one so minor it almost escapes the tally threshold, requires a brief line in the ledger. In the passage between the north wing and the central hall, a single wooden peg that held a sliding screen track had worked loose over the winter, causing the screen to catch and judder when opened. The steward sent for a carpenter's apprentice, who tapped the peg back into place and reinforced it with a wedge of scrap cypress, charging only 6 copper cash for the visit since it involved no materials beyond the scrap, which the household provided. You record it under repairs as reseating of sliding screen peg, North Corridor, labor only, and you write the date, the cost, and the verification circle in quick succession, the brush barely lifted between strokes. Outside, the morning gruel's bubbling has ceased, replaced by the quieter sounds of the pot being lifted and the ladles scraping the bottom. The first bowls are being filled and distributed, and you can picture the worm-tender Sada collecting her portion before she returns to the rearing shed, where the first batch of silkworm eggs has begun to hatch. The hatchlings are minute, each no larger than a speck of coarse pepper, and they will require constant attention in the coming days as they begin their endless eating, their tiny jaws scything through the mulberry leaves laid out on the new hinoki trays. The thought of the rearing shed draws a final silkworm-related tally stick from the bundle, this one notched for a set of reed screens used to shade the shed from direct sunlight, which can overheat the larvae. The screens were woven by the same mat maker who provided the servants' mats in the 12th month, using the same river reeds, and they were installed on the east-facing side of the shed to filter the morning sun. 4 screens were ordered at a cost of 12 copper cash each, totaling 48 cash, and the steward notes that they can be reused in subsequent seasons. You record the expense, reed sunshades for silkworm shed, 4 screens, and beneath it the price and a note on their reuse value. The ink dries quickly on this line, perhaps because the air has grown slightly warmer as the midday approaches, and the paper now feels faintly supple beneath your palm. With the silkworm entries closed, you turn to a single tally stick that has rested at the bottom of the bundle, one that records a small domestic provision for the ladies' writing quarters. A fresh supply of ink sticks, similar to the one you use but of a slightly higher grade made with pine soot from the Yoshino Mountains, was ordered from the temple stationer, who supplies the household's literary needs. 6 sticks were purchased, wrapped individually in oiled paper and packed in a small cedar box, for a total of 180 copper cash. You enter the item, fine ink sticks, Yoshino pine soot, 6 pieces, and add that 2 of the sticks were placed in the lady's own writing set, while the remaining 4 went to the household stores for future use. The characters for Yoshino require careful strokes, and you execute them with the practiced shape of one who has written the place name many times before. The afternoon stretches on in the same quiet tempo. You add a few more drops to the inkstone, not because the ink is running low, but because you wish to maintain the correct consistency as the air slowly warms and the evaporation speeds up. The grinding motion is effortless now, a habit of the wrist, and the faint noise it makes blends with the distant rustle of the reeds outside the window and the sporadic, muffled conversation of maids passing in the corridor. Before you conclude the session, you add a summary line at the bottom of the day's entries, totaling the expenses in their various currencies and converting them into a standard measure of unhulled rice for the household's annual accounting. The silkworm-related costs come to 6 koku of unhulled rice and wages, plus 407 copper cash in leaves, trays, and screens, while the household repairs and other provisions add a further 211 copper cash, with the tatami edging and ink sticks making up the larger portion of that sum. You write the totals without commentary, letting the figures speak their own plain language, and then you mark the page with a small character in the corner indicating that the second month's entries are complete, and the third month begins on the next sheet. The closing rituals are by now a familiar comfort. You rinse the brush in the water bowl, swirling it gently and watching the last of the ink diffuse into the water in lazy grey tendrils, then dab the brush dry and reshape the tip, laying it on the rest with the hairs suspended just above the porcelain. The inkstone is wiped clean with the damp cloth, and the remaining liquid is tipped into the waste pot, which now holds a thin layer of evaporated grey residue from weeks of use. The ink stick, its edges worn smooth from grinding, is wrapped and placed back in its wooden case, and the ledger is closed, the pages are lined, the paperweight returned to its sentinel position. You rise from the cushion, your legs carrying the slight stiffness of long sitting, and you slide the chamber door open. The corridor is empty, and the light has taken on the amber quality of late afternoon, slanting through the lattice windows in long golden beams that pick out the grain of the wooden floorboards. As you walk toward the outer gate, you pass the kitchen shed, where the great iron pot now hangs silent and clean against the wall, and you pass the northern wall, behind which the silkworm shed hums with the faintest noise, a continuous whisper of countless tiny jaws, chewing mulberry leaves on the new hinoki trays. A sound so soft it might be the wind in the reeds, or the memory of snowfall. You pause for only a moment, then continue on, leaving the residence to its spring stillness, the ledger resting in the quiet chamber, the tally sticks counted and tied, the worm tender finishing her bowl of gruel, and the silkworms eating their slow way toward the cocoons that will come. The 4th month begins not with a date on the calendar, but with a change in the scent of the air, a thick wetness that arrives overnight and stays through the morning, turning the garden paths into dark ribbons of mud. You wake in your small quarters to the sound of rain on the roof tiles, a steady shushing noise that fills the silence and seeps into your dreams before you fully surface. By the time you walk the covered corridor to the writing chamber, the wooden planks beneath your sandals feel slightly swollen, and each footfall produces a soft, damp creak that the drier months never drew out. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere has shifted. The paper on the sliding screens appears more translucent than before, glowing with a pale grey light that carries no warmth, and the air sits heavy against your skin, cool and moist. The brazier has been lit, but its heat struggles against the pervasive dampness, pushing back only a small circle of dryness around the desk. A maid has placed a fresh bundle of tally sticks on the tray, these ones darkened at the edges from the humidity, and she has also left a small iron kettle of hot water beside the brazier, its lid trembling slightly as steam escapes in thin wisps. You settle onto the cushion, noting how the hemp cloth feels faintly clammy, and you begin the morning by pouring water from the gourd dropper into the inkstone. The drops land with a smaller sound than usual, as if the moisture in the air has already softened everything it touches. The first tally stick records an expense that the rain itself has made necessary: oil for the rain lamps. The household possesses a number of these lamps, small iron bowls set on wooden stands and filled with pressed sesame oil, each fitted with a floating wick of twisted rush fiber. They are placed along the outer corridors and at the main gate during heavy downpours, for the overcast sky darkens the residence so thoroughly that mid-afternoon can feel like twilight. The steward's notation indicates that the household purchased full show of lamp oil from a pressing shed in the Western Artisan Quarter, paying 48 copper cash per show, for a total of 192 copper cash. The oil was delivered in a ceramic jar sealed with waxed cloth and carried by an apprentice who wore a broad straw rain hat that dripped a trail along the entire length of the corridor. You dip the brush and write the entry, describing the item as rain lamp oil, pressed sesame, for show, and you record the unit price and the total. Below this, you note that the oil was tested by a serving maid who filled one lamp and measured the burn time, confirming that the wick consumed roughly 1/10 of a show over the course of a single evening. The entry ends with a verification circle, and the brush lifts cleanly from the page. While you write, the rain intensifies. The shushing on the roof grows to a steady drumming, and you can hear water gurgling through the bamboo drain pipes at the corners of the building, splashing into the stone catchment basins below. A gust of wind pushes against the paper screens, making them bow inward by a finger's width before settling back, and somewhere down the corridor a maid calls out softly, her voice muffled by walls and weather. You ignore these distractions, or rather you let them pass through your awareness without catching, and you reach for the second tally stick. This stick concerns fresh slit covers for the bamboo blinds. The household's outer blinds, known as sudair, hang along the verandas to shade the rooms from summer sun. But during the 4th month, they are still rolled up and stored on wooden racks. The steward, anticipating the coming dampness of the rainy season, has ordered new slip covers of coarse hemp to protect the stored blinds from mold. The tally stick shows that 14 new covers were sewn by 2 women from the servants' quarters, using leftover cloth from the textile stores, and that the labor was compensated not in coin, but with an extra ration of polished rice for each seamstress, half a show per person per day over 5 days of work. The total cost in rice amounts to 5 show, a figure so small it barely registers in the household stores. You record the item as hemp slip covers for bamboo blinds, 14 pieces, and you note the rice payment as a separate line beneath it, adding the category mark in red for household maintenance. The brush moves smoothly, and the damp air seems to make the ink dry a fraction slower, giving each character a faintly deeper sheen before it settles into the fiber. The rain does not stop, but it shifts its rhythm, moving from a steady beat to something more irregular, with moments of near silence broken by sudden flurries. From the window you can see the garden dissolving into soft shapes, the stone lantern, now a blur of grey, the plum tree, a dark smudge against the mist, the moss, a brighter green smear beneath the falling water. Puddles form in the hollows of the stone path, each ringed with concentric ripples that spread and collapse in an endless, hypnotic pattern. You watch for a few breaths, long enough to notice that the world outside has no edges, only gentle gradients of wetness. And then you return to the desk. The third tally stick is slender and made of a darker wood, perhaps cherry, and it records the purchase of extra sandals for the messengers. During the rainy season, straw sandals degrade quickly. The plaited rice straw absorbs water and softens. The cords loosen and the soles wear through after only a few journeys across the muddy streets of the capital. The household steward has ordered 12 pairs of new sandals from a sandal maker who lives near the river market, a man who weaves them extra thick for wet weather. Each pair costs 6 copper cash, making a total of 72 copper cash for the dozen. Additionally, the tally notes that the sandals were treated with a thin layer of boiled persimmon juice, a practice that hardens the straw and slows the decay, adding a surcharge of 2 copper cash per pair. The total expense therefore reaches 96 copper cash. You inscribe the characters for wet weather straw sandals, treated, 12 pairs, and you record the unit price, the treatment surcharge, and the grand total. A note below mentions that the old sandals, those 2 frayed to wear, were collected by the gardener and used as mulch around the bases of the young azalea bushes near the southern wall, a detail that costs nothing but finds its way into the ledger as a small annotation, an observation of thrift. Between entries, you pause to tend the brazier. The charcoal has dimmed to a glowing crust, and the room's chill is returning. You lift the lid of the clay charcoal pot and select 3 lumps, placing them in a triangle over the embers. Then you pour a small amount of hot water from the iron kettle into a shallow clay cup, more for the warmth to hold than for any thirst, and you let the steam curl around your fingers before setting the cup beside the inkstone. The heat soaks into your palm, loosening the slight stiffness in your knuckles from the damp, and you take one slow breath that tastes of charcoal smoke and wet earth. Now you turn to the 4th tally stick, one that records an expense related to the household's food stores. Heavy rains make travel difficult, and the normal deliveries of fresh vegetables and fish become irregular. The steward, in anticipation of this, has purchased dried abalone from a coastal merchant who visited the capital in the last week of the 3rd month. The abalone, caught and sun-dried on the rocky shores of the Eastern Sea, arrives in thin, amber-colored strips that can be rehydrated in broth for the ladies' evening meals. The tally stick shows that the household bought 1 koku of dried abalone, measured by volume in a wooden box, paying 2 bolts of fine silk cloth of the grade suitable for court tribute. The silk came from the household's own workshop, where the lady's personal weaver produces a small surplus for trade each year. You record the item as dried abalone strips, 1 koku volume, and you specify the payment as 2 bolts of fine silk, noting that the weaver has been informed and the textile inventory adjusted. Below this, you add a brief annotation that the kitchen staff inspected the abalone for any sign of mold or insect damage and found the strips uniformly dry, smelling of salt and distant waves. The page now holds 4 entries, each clean and spaced with even margins, the characters dark and sharp against the cream paper. The rain continues its irregular dance, sometimes heavy enough to make the screens rattle softly, sometimes subsiding to a whisper that barely exceeds the sound of your own breathing. You grind a fresh pool of ink, the ink stick making its gentle scraping sound that blends with the ambient noise, and you pick up the 5th tally stick, which is thicker and longer than the others. This stick carries a calculation rather than a simple purchase. The dampness in the air has begun to affect the storage rooms along the northern side of the compound, where the household keeps its reserves of rice, soybeans, millet, and dried vegetables. The wooden floors in those rooms have absorbed moisture, and the air inside feels close and heavy, threatening the quality of the stored goods. The steward, after inspecting the rooms with a lamp, determined that the household must dry them out using firewood, burning small fires in portable clay stoves placed in the center of each room, with the doors left slightly ajar to allow smoke to escape while the heat drives the moisture from the walls and floorboards. The tally stick records how much brushwood was purchased for this purpose over the course of 10 days, 4 bundles per day, each bundle weighing roughly 5 kin, at a cost of 3 copper cash per bundle. Multiply 4 bundles by 10 days and you reach 40 bundles. Multiply 40 bundles by 3 cash, and the total comes to 120 copper cash. The notation also records the labor of the porter who hauled the brushwood from the fuel merchant's yard near the southern gate. A man named Goro, who was paid with 2 meals of barley gruel and a small ladle of pickled radish per trip, a compensation too minor to enter into the monetary ledger, but noted on the stick as a reminder of fairness. You work through the arithmetic slowly, writing each number with care, checking the multiplication by counting on your fingers beneath the desk, then noting the total and the labor in 2 separate lines. The brushwork is methodical. You write brushwood 40 bundles for drying northern storerooms, then the price, then the supplementary note about the porter's meals, and finally the red category mark for store's maintenance. The ink pulls slightly in the fiber, spreading a tiny bit more than it did in the drier months, but the characters remain legible, their edges only marginally softer. By now, the light outside, already dim, has begun its slow descent toward evening. The grey of the sky deepens to a darker pewter, and the rain seems to thicken, the drops growing heavier and more defined, each one striking the roof with a distinct tap. You light a small oil lamp on the corner of the desk, touching a splinter of kindling to the wick, until a small flame catches and steadies, casting a warm orange circle across the page. The lamp's flame flickers when a draft slips through the screens, but it holds, and the scent of sesame oil joins the other smells in the room: wet wood, charcoal ash, ink, and the distant, savory odor of the kitchen's evening preparations. The final tally stick for this session concerns a small but necessary repair. The rain has revealed a leak in the eastern eave of the southern storage shed, a corner where the roof tiles have shifted slightly during the winter frosts, leaving a gap through which water now drips onto a stack of empty baskets. The steward has ordered a temporary mend using clay and old rags, the cheapest materials available, until a tiler can be called in the drier months. The tally records the purchase of half a basket of clay from the riverbank, gathered and delivered by a labourer who charged 6 copper cash for his trouble, and the use of a bundle of old rags from the household's rag basket, valued at nothing. The labour of the handyman who climbed the ladder and packed the clay into the gap was compensated with an extra portion of evening soup, a fish head broth with a few slices of radish, which also carries no monetary value. You record the expense simply: clay for temporary roof repair, half basket, 6 copper cash. The rest you note in a brief annotation, the brush moving across the page to form the words rags from household stock, labour compensated in food, and then the final verification circle of the day. You set the brush down and look at the page. 6 entries now fill the space, each one a small record of the household's quiet battle against the rain, oil, slipcovers, sandals, abalone, brushwood, and clay. The figures align in their column, the red marks dot the margins, and the overall impression is one of order persisting in the face of dampness and darkness. You feel no urgency, no particular emotion, only the steady satisfaction of having captured the day's small transactions in ink. The closing rituals proceed as they always do. You rinse the brush in the water bowl, watching the dark swirls of ink dissipate until the water runs clear, then dab the brush on the cloth and reshape the tip. You wipe the inkstone with a damp rag, removing the day's accumulation of dried flecks and thickened residue, and you tip the remaining liquid into the waste pot. The inkstick goes back into its oiled paper and its wooden case, and the ledger is closed. The pages are lined, the paper weight placed on top. The oil lamp on the desk, still burning, makes the room feel smaller and more intimate, its glow reflecting off the dark wood of the shelf where the tally sticks rest in their cedar box. Before you stand, you listen to the rain. It has settled into a rhythm that seems to match the slow pace of your own pulse, a steady, patient sound that fills every corner of the house without demanding anything. The dripping from the eaves, the gurgling in the drain pipes, the occasional splash from the garden puddles, all merge into a continuous low murmur that erases silence without replacing it with noise. You think for a moment of the clay packed into the roof gap, slowly hardening as the rain continues to fall around it, doing its small job in the darkness with no one watching. You rise, your legs slightly stiff, and you take the oil lamp with you as you slide open the chamber door and step into the corridor. The wooden planks are cool and faintly slippery underfoot, and the walls throw back the lamp's light in dim, wavering patches. You walk slowly, your free hand brushing the wall for balance, and you pass the main hall where a single brazier still glows, its embers reflected in the polished floor. The house is quiet, its inhabitants already withdrawn to their quarters, and the only movement anywhere is the rise and fall of lamp flames behind paper screens, the slow breathing of a resident settling into its nightly rest. By the time you reach your own small room, the rain has softened further, now no more than a fine drizzle that mists the air rather than falling through it. You place the lamp on a shelf, extinguish it with a gentle puff, and lie down on your bedding, the hemp quilt pulled up to your chin. The darkness is complete and cool, and the sound of the rain, now almost a whisper, follows you into sleep like a slow, unending lullaby written in water and time. The 5th month arrives like a slow unrolling of silk, bringing warmth that settles into the wooden beams of the residence and coaxes the first thin haze of heat from the garden stones by midday. You know the season has turned not by any calendar hanging on the wall, but by the change in the light through your chamber window, which now carries a golden, honeyed tone rather than the silver pallor of spring, and by the scent of wisteria that drifts from the trellis near the southern veranda, a fragrance so sweet and heavy it seems to coat the air itself. When you arrive at the writing chamber, the brazier is cold and empty, pushed against the wall. A maid has already carried away the ash bucket, and in place of the charcoal pot there stands a celadon vase holding a single spray of pale lavender wisteria, one of the first cuttings from the vine. The paper screens are open, a hand's width wider than they were in the 4th month, and through that gap the garden shows itself transformed, thick with green, the wisteria clusters hanging like bunched clouds above the wooden walkway. You settle onto the cushion, which has been changed to a lighter summer fabric of woven grass that rustles faintly when you shift your weight, and you survey the desk. The ledger lies beneath its paperweight. The tally stick bundle for the day is tied with a pale yellow cord the color of butter, and the inkstone has been wiped to a dull shine. Beside the desk, a shallow wooden tray holds a square of thin silk, meant to demonstrate the quality of the cloth being ordered this month. And beside that, a small paper sample of the red dye to be approved, its color as deep as dried azuki beans. The whole arrangement speaks of a household turning its mind to summer garments and the small necessary purchases that make the hot months bearable. You pour 3 drops of water into the inkstone well, unwrap the inkstick and begin to grind, the motion so familiar now that your wrist performs it, while your eyes wander to the garden where the wisteria sways in a breeze too gentle to hear. Its movement so slow and continuous, it becomes a kind of stillness. The first tally stick of the morning arrives, with the scent of dye still clinging to it, a faint earthy perfume from the artisan's workshop where it was cut. It records a purchase from the dyer who maintains a large iron cauldron in a yard near the Eastern Market, a man named Yosaburo whose family has produced the distinctive azuki bean red for 3 generations. Lady Shunnigan has requested new summer robes in a shade that mimics the flower of the bush clover, a color achieved by boiling dried azuki beans with a mordant of wood ash and a touch of vinegar, then dipping the silk repeatedly until it absorbs the precise depth of crimson. The steward's notation tells you that the household supplied its own silk to the dyer, 20 lengths of plain white silk woven in the resident's workshop, and that the dyeing fee was set at 8 copper cash per length, plus an additional 2 cash per length, plus an additional 2 cash per length for the special mordant treatment that makes the color fast against summer sweat. The total labor charge for the dyer comes to 200 copper cash for the 20 lengths, and the steward has added a note that Yosaburo required 12 days to complete the work, each day beginning with the boiling of the dye bath before dawn. You dip the brush and write the entry. Dyeing fee, azuki bean red, 20 lengths of household silk. Beneath this, you record the unit price, the mordant surcharge, the total, and a note that the dyed silk was returned folded in mulberry paper, inspected by the lady's personal dresser, and found to be an even color without streaks. The verification circle follows, small and perfect. As you set the brush down, the wisteria outside the window releases a particularly strong wave of fragrance, as if the warming sun has drawn out more of its oil, and you pause to let the scent wash over you. It is sweet without being cloying, floral but not sharp, and it mingles with the ink's woody coolness in a way that makes the chamber feel like a place suspended between indoors and out. You pour a small cup of water from the earthenware pitcher on the corner shelf and drink it slowly, the liquid tepid from the room's warmth and tasting faintly of the clay vessel it came from, then return to the tally sticks. The second stick is narrower, almost a splinter, and it concerns the weaving of a new thin silk summer robe, a garment known as a hito, to be worn directly over the underrobe on the hottest days of the 6th and 7th months. The household weaver, a quiet woman named Osaru, who works a floor loom in a small room off the northern corridor, has been given a supply of raw silk thread from the silkworm shed you recorded in the 2nd month. From that thread she has produced a bolt of gossamer silk, so light that a full length of it can pass through a finger ring, and she has sewn it into a simple summer robe with straight sleeves and an unlined body, the seams rolled and stitched with a thread of the same silk. The tally stick records her labor for this specific robe as a separate line from her regular monthly wage, since the lady commanded it as an additional piece outside the normal seasonal allotment. The weaver is to receive a payment of 1 bolt of medium-grade hemp cloth, the same kind used for the household's standard payments, valued at 50 copper cash, and an extra ration of polished rice for the week she spent on the robe, totaling 1 show. You record the entry, Summer Hito robe, gossamer silk, woven and sewn by Otosaru. The payment is listed as 1 bolt of hemp cloth and 1 show of polished rice, and you note that the robe was tried on a wooden dress form in the ladies' quarters, the hem falling exactly to the designated length of 3 shaku 2 sun, and that no alteration was needed. The brush moves cleanly, the characters for gossamer requiring a light touch so the ink does not pull heavily on the delicate meaning. Now a third tally stick, this one marked with a tiny ink sketch of a fan to indicate its content, directs your attention to the fan maker. Summer fans are indispensable in the Heian household, used not only to stir the heavy air, but as accessories in conversation, for shielding a smile or directing a glance. Lady Shonagon has ordered 2 new round paper fans from a fan maker who operates a small stall near the temple of Kiyomizu, a craftsman who pastes layers of white paper over a frame of split bamboo, and then decorates the surface with simple ink landscapes. The landscapes chosen for these 2 fans are, according to the steward's note, a view of the Uji River with a single bridge in the foreground, and on the second fan, a cluster of pine saplings on a hillside under a crescent moon. The price for each fan is 25 copper cash, for a total of 50 cash, and an additional 5 cash was paid for the extra fine paper that prevents the ink from bleeding through to the reverse side. You record the item, 2 round paper fans, ink landscapes of Uji River and pine hillside. The price is detailed, and you add a note that the fans were delivered wrapped in a square of purple cloth and placed in the ladies' fan stand, which already holds 6 others, each with a different season or scene. Between entries, the light in the chamber shifts. The sun climbs higher, and the golden quality of the morning gives way to a brighter, whiter illumination that makes the paper screens glow like parchment lanterns. The wisteria outside continues its slow, hypnotic sway, the clusters of flowers turning slightly on their stems as if nodding to an unheard rhythm. You rise from the cushion to stretch your legs, walking to the window and standing there with your hands loosely clasped behind your back. The garden is still, but not static. Butterflies cross the space between the wisteria and the iris bed in lazy, looping flights, and a single bee moves among the blossoms with a low drone that reaches you as a distant hum, more felt than heard. After a few moments you return to the desk, and the cushion rustles beneath you with the sound of dry grass stirring. The fourth tally stick addresses the seasonal airing of garments, a ritual of the 5th month when all the winter robes are brought out of their storage chests, inspected for damage, brushed, and hung on wooden racks in the garden for a full day to absorb the sun and lose their mustiness. The tally stick does not record a purchase, but rather a count, and counts must also enter the ledger so that the household knows what it possesses. The steward's notation runs to several lines, dense with small characters: 12 lined winter robes of silk, 8 unlined autumn robes of figured twill, 15 underrobes of plain white hemp, 9 outer coats of padded brocade, and 3 travelling cloaks of oiled paper and cloth. These were all taken from their Paulownia wood chests in the storeroom and carried to the inner garden by 2 maids who worked for a full morning and a half of an afternoon. Their labour is recorded as an extra task, compensated with a small allowance of pickled plums and an extra cake of pounded rice each, the cost of which is considered negligible, but noted for fairness. You enter a heading in the ledger, 5th month airing of garments, and beneath it you list the items in a neat column, each category on its own line with the quantity beside it. The maid's compensation is written as a single line below the list, and the red category mark for household inventory appears in the margin. The brushwork on the numbers is particularly careful, for counts must never be ambiguous. Following the airing tally, a smaller stick records the replacement of a single boxwood comb, an item so minor it almost seems beneath the dignity of a ledger entry. But the household accounts catch everything. Lady Shonagon had a comb, a small one with fine teeth and a plain back, carved from the pale, dense wood of the box tree that she used for smoothing her hair before arranging the heavy court coiffure. The comb's spine had developed a tiny crack during the dry winter, and though it still functioned, the lady preferred it replaced before it snapped and damaged a silk hair ribbon. The steward purchased a new comb from a comb maker in the central market who works with boxwood, cypress, and occasionally ivory, and the price was 12 copper cash for a simple, unadorned piece. You write the entry, boxwood comb, replacement, single piece, and record the price, adding that the old comb was retained to be recarved into a hairpin by one of the maids who practices such things in her spare hours. The note costs nothing but preserves the principle of thrift. Outside, the bee has moved on, and the butterflies have multiplied, 3 of them now chasing each other in a spiral around the wisteria trellis. The flowers continue their silent nodding, and a few petals, the palest lavender, have begun to loosen and drift downward, settling on the moss and on the rim of the stone lantern, like tiny discarded fans. The afternoon is advancing, but it does so without urgency, the sun stretching its arc in a long, slow curve that leaves the shadows soft-edged and the air thick with warmth and scent. Now the final tally stick of the day lies before you, and it records a precise measurement, the length of silk ribbon required to re-tie the curtain cord in Lady Sholnagon's private sitting room. The curtain cord, a twisted silk rope dyed a muted purple, hangs across the doorway to her inner chamber and is drawn close during the warm afternoons to keep the room dim and cool. The cord itself is in good repair, but the silk ribbon that binds its end to the wall hook had frayed, its threads separating from repeated pulling. The steward measured the old ribbon against a carpenter's ruler and found it to be 1 shaku and 4 sun in length, approximately the span from an adult's wrist to elbow. A new ribbon was cut from a remnant of the same purple-dyed silk used for the cord, and the remnant was taken from the workshop stores. There is no purchase cost, only the note of the measurement and the material's origin, but you record it anyway. Silk ribbon for curtain, purple, 1 shaku 4 sun, cut from household remnant. The entry is the smallest of the day, a single line with no price, yet it holds its place in the ledger with the same right as the Azuki bean red dye and the fanmaker's landscapes. With the ribbon recorded, the day's entries are complete. You lean back slightly from the desk, placing your hands on your knees, and you let your eyes drift closed for a moment, not from tiredness, but from a kind of gentle fullness, a sense that the page holds exactly what it should. The wisteria perfume has settled into the room's fabric now, and when you open your eyes again, the light has shifted to a deeper amber, the sun beginning its descent behind the western hills. You take up the brush one last time to write a summary line at the bottom of the column. 5th month wardrobe expenses total 250 copper cash and 1 bolt of hemp cloth, with supplementary rice and provisions as noted. The figures are neat, the sum correct. The closing rituals begin. You empty the water dropper's last drops into the inkstone well and swirl the brush in a wider circle, rinsing the deer hair tip until the water runs faintly grey and then clear. You dab the brush on the cloth, shape the point into its fine tapered form, and rest it on the porcelain brush. Rest with the hairs suspended above the surface. The inkstone is wiped clean, the dried residue dampened and lifted away with the cloth, and the remaining liquid is poured into the waste pot, which now holds the accumulated sediment of an entire season, a thin grey silt that settles to the bottom and dries between sessions. You wrap the inkstick and put it away, close the ledger with a soft rustle of mulberry paper, and place the paperweight on the cover, its cool weight pressing the pages flat. Before you leave, you stand at the window one last time, watching the wisteria sway in the same slow rhythm it has kept all day. The petals continue to fall, 1 or 2 at a time, drifting down with the unhurried grace of snow in a warmer world. A maid passes below with a broom, but she does not sweep. She simply gathers the fallen petals into a small basket, perhaps to scatter them in a different garden or to press in a book, and then she moves on. The stone lantern stands in its deepening shade. The iris leaves bend under the weight of nothing but air, and the whole garden breathes out the day's warmth in a long, silent exhalation. You slide open the chamber door and step into the corridor, which now glows with the last of the afternoon light, the paper screens turning it into a soft orange pink that reminds you of the Azuki bean color drying on the dyer's rack. Your footsteps are quiet, the wooden planks warm beneath your sandals, and as you walk toward the outer gate, you pass the weaver's room, where Otasuru has already begun threading her loom for the next project. The shuttle clicking softly in the dusk. You pass the storeroom where the aired garments hang in neat rows, their sleeves aligned like sleeping wings. You pass the ladies' sitting room, where the new purple ribbon binds the curtain cord to the hook, and the 2 round fans rest in their stand, their ink landscapes waiting for a hand to stir the summer air. And then you are outside, the gravel of the path crunching underfoot, the wisteria receding behind you, its scent following you only as far as the gate before the evening wind carries it away. The 6th month begins as a wave of heat that rolls across the capital and settles into every corner of the residence, pressing against the paper screens and wilting the iris leaves in the garden until they droop toward the moss like tired hands. You arrive at the writing chamber earlier than usual, hoping to catch the brief coolness of dawn, but even at this hour the air feels thick and still, as if the whole world has been wrapped in a warm, damp cloth. The sliding screens are fully open now, pushed back to their frames to allow any breeze that might wander through, but the wisteria beyond the veranda hangs motionless, its last few blossoms brown and curling at the edges, the season of purple already faded into memory. Inside the chamber, a maid has placed a new arrangement on the shelf where the celadon vase once held wisteria, a shallow ceramic bowl filled with water and floating 2 white camellia petals, their edges just beginning to brown, a gesture toward coolness that works only in the mind. The brazier remains absent, and in its place stands a simple standing screen of pale reed, positioned to block any direct sun that might fall across the desk. A fresh bundle of tally sticks tied with a cord, the color of young bamboo, waits on the tray, and beside them rests a small ceramic dish holding a mound of powdered incense, the sandalwood kind that the household burns to repel mosquitoes during the long summer nights. You settle onto the grass weave cushion, which now feels warm rather than cool against your legs, and you pour the usual 3 drops of water into the inkstone well, watching them bead and settle with the same patience you have cultivated over half a year of mornings. The 6th and 7th months together form the season of the Tanabata festival, the festival of the weaving maiden, when the household prepares offerings and entertainments to mark the one night of the year when the star Vega meets the star Altair across the river of the Milky Way. The preparations have already begun in the kitchen and the storehouses, and the tally sticks before you carry the weight of these small but numerous purchases, each one a thread in the fabric of a tradition that repeats without variation year after year. You unwrap the inkstick, grind a fresh pool of deep black ink, and begin. The first tally stick is thicker than most, notched with a list rather than a single item, for the steward has bundled the festival offerings into one record to simplify your work. The stick enumerates 7 items, each corresponding to a traditional offering placed on the Tanabata altar in the main hall. 7 sheets of fine poetry paper, 7 small ink cakes of the pressed pine variety, 7 colored threads of red, blue, yellow, white, black, green, and purple silk, and 7 small melons of the early summer type called makua, pale green, with faint stripes and a crisp, watery flesh. The papers were purchased from a stationer near the university, the ink cakes from the temple supplier who also provides the household's writing materials, the threads from the weaver Otasuru's personal stock with a small compensation noted, and the melons from a farmer who brings his cart to the eastern market every 5th day. The total expenses are broken down on the stick, the 7 sheets of poetry paper, at 4 copper cash each, for a sum of 28 cash, the 7 ink cakes at 6 copper cash each, for 42 cash, the 7 colored threads valued together at 14 copper cash, since Otusuru asked only for the cost of the raw silk, and the 7 melons at 8 cash each, for 56 cash. The full total for the Tanabata offerings comes to 140 copper cash. You dip the brush and write the heading, Tanabata Festival Offerings, 6th month. Beneath it, you list each item on its own line with quantity, unit price, and subtotal. Then draw a line and write the sum, the ink flowing in steady strokes that reflect nothing more than the plain arithmetic of devotion. You set the brush down and listen. From somewhere in the garden, the first cicada of the season has begun its song. A single high drone that starts, holds for a long moment, and then stops as abruptly as it began, leaving a silence that feels hollow until the sound resumes. The cicada's rhythm is irregular and unpredictable, each burst of noise a surprise followed by an absence, and it will become the constant backdrop of the next 2 months. A sound so pervasive that it will eventually disappear from conscious notice. Already, after only a few repetitions, you find that your attention has drifted away from it entirely. The second tally stick records the incense that you noticed on the tray, The powdered sandalwood blend burned in small conical mounds on ceramic dishes placed near doorways and windows during the evenings. The mosquitoes this year are particularly numerous, breeding in the warm standing water left by the fourth month's rains, and the household has purchased an extra supply of the incense beyond the normal summer allotment. The steward's notation indicates that the incense was bought from an apothecary in the central market who compounds it from sandalwood shavings, dried clove buds, and a small amount of camphor, all ground together with a mortar and pestle until the mixture becomes a fine powder that burns slowly and releases a heavy, sweet smoke. The household purchased 6 packets, each packet weighing roughly 1 ryo and costing 25 copper cash for a total of 150 copper cash. You write the entry, mosquito incense, sandalwood and clove blend, 6 packets, and record the price, adding a note that the incense is to be burned from the 6th day of the 6th month through the end of the 8th month, with 1 packet lasting approximately 10 of the 8th month, with 1 packet lasting approximately 10 days if used each night. The brush traces the character for clove with its many small strokes, each one distinct and deliberate. Between entries, the heat grows. The sun has cleared the eastern roof now, and a shaft of direct light falls across the corner of the garden, illuminating a patch of moss with a brightness so intense it seems almost white. The cicada has been joined by another, and the 2 insects trade calls in a pattern that never quite synchronizes, producing a staggered, weaving drone that rises and falls without melody. You reach for the earthenware pitcher on the corner shelf and pour a cup of water, drinking it in small sips. Then you dip your fingers in the remaining water and press them to your temples and the back of your neck, a small relief that lasts only moments before the warmth closes in again. Now the third tally stick addresses a different kind of festival preparation, one that has less to do with offerings and more with the physical comfort of the households during the long hot evenings. The steward has ordered cooling cakes made from arrowroot starch, a summer delicacy that is prepared by dissolving the powdery white starch in water, heating it until it thickens into a translucent jelly, pouring it into shallow wooden molds, and then lowering it into the well bucket to chill in the cool underground water for several hours. The result is a soft, trembling cake that is cut into cubes and served with a drizzle of sweet syrup made from reduced plum juice. The tally stick records the purchase of 3 kin of arrowroot starch from a merchant who brings it down from the mountains where the root is harvested and ground, priced at 30 copper cash per kin for a total of 90 cash. The plum syrup was made in the household kitchen from the previous year's pickled plums and carries no purchase cost, but the steward has noted that the cook used half a kin of brown sugar to sweeten the syrup, the sugar costing 12 copper cash and purchased separately from a seller of imported goods. You write the entry, arrowroot starch, 3 kin for summer cooling cakes, then the cost of the sugar on a subsidiary line, and then a note that the well bucket was cleaned before use and a new rope of twisted hemp was attached to its handle to prevent any foreign taste from reaching the cakes, the rope itself a minor expense of 4 copper cash recorded elsewhere. With the cooling cakes entered, you turn to a 4th tally stick that continues the theme of summer food but moves from sweets to something more practical. The kitchen has purchased a supply of dried gourd strips, a food that keeps well in the heat and can be quickly rehydrated in broth for the ladies' light summer meals. The gourd, known as campio, is grown on trellises in the foothills, harvested when long and green, peeled into thin ribbons with a special knife, and hung on lines to dry in the sun until it turns a pale, leathery beige. The household ordered 1 large bundle of campio, weighing approximately 2 kin, at a price of 20 copper cash, from a farmer's wife who specializes in drying gourds and sells her product at the Western Market on market days. You record the item, dried gourd strips, 1 bundle, 2 kin, and write the price, adding that the bundle was hung from a hook in the kitchen's dry storage, where it will remain until the autumn when fresh vegetables become available again. The verification circle follows, as round and steady as all the others. Outside, the cicadas have now multiplied to 4 or 5, their collective drone a constant shimmering presence that fills the garden and spills into the chamber through the open screens. The sound is not unpleasant, it is simply there, a texture of summer as fundamental as the heat and the light, and it has the strange property of making silence feel deeper when it occasionally unpredictably stops. You rest the brush on its porcelain rest and let your hands fall to your lap, your gaze drifting across the garden where the heat now shimmers visibly above the stone lantern, a rippling distortion of the air like water flowing upward. The moss looks dry despite the shade, and the iris leaves droop further, their tips yellowing. A single butterfly, white and small, flutters erratically across the garden and disappears behind the plum tree, which now carries a full canopy of green leaves, dense and still. After a short pause, you lift the brush again and reach for the fifth tally stick, which is marked with a character indicating carpentry. The Tanabata festival requires, in addition to the altar offerings, the construction of a small star-viewing platform on the northern edge of the garden, where the lady and her attendants can sit on the night of the festival and observe the meeting of the two stars. The platform is a temporary structure, built of bamboo poles lashed together with hemp cord and topped with planks of lightweight sugi wood that will be removed and stored after the festival passes. The tally stick records the purchase of 12 bamboo poles of the correct diameter, each roughly 2 shaku in length, cut from a grove near the river and delivered by a bamboo cutter who charges 3 copper cash per pole for a total of 36 cash. The suji planks, of which 6 were needed, were cut from a log in the household's own woodpile by a carpenter's apprentice who was paid 20 copper cash with a half day of work. The hemp cord came from the household stores, its value negligible. You write the entry, Tanabata viewing platform bamboo and sugi, and list the poles, the planks and the labor, with the total coming to 56 copper cash. A note at the bottom describes the platform's dimensions: 4 shaku wide and 6 shaku long, large enough to seat 4 people on reed cushions, with a low railing of split bamboo on 3 sides. The 6th tally stick returns to the subject of textiles, for even during the festival season the household's ongoing need for cloth and clothing continues. The steward has ordered a set of new summer sleeping robes for the lady's personal use. Simple garments of unlined hemp cloth, loose and wide-sleeved, to be worn during the hot nights when even a silk underrobe would cling uncomfortably. The robes, 3 in number, were sewn by a seamstress in the servants' quarters from hemp cloth already in the household stores, and the only cost is the seamstress's labor, compensated with 1 show of polished rice per robe, for a total of 3 show. You recall the item, summer sleeping robes, hemp, 3 pieces, and note the rice payment, the quantity small enough that it barely affects the household's vast stores, but recorded nonetheless, for the ledger forgets nothing. By now the morning has crossed into midday, and the sun hangs directly overhead, reducing the shadows in the garden to small dark pools directly beneath each object. The cicadas are at full chorus, their drone so constant that it has become a kind of silence itself, a background against which smaller sounds are measured, the rustle of the reed screen when a faint breeze finally stirs, the distant clack of the weaver's shuffle from Otsuru's workshop, the soft brush of your own sleeve against the desk as you write. The incense dish on the tray has not been lit, but its dry, spicy scent rises faintly in the heat, a promise of evening smoke to come. The 7th and final tally stick for this session is a small one, recording a purchase that might easily be forgotten: a new supply of lamp wicks for the summer evenings. The household burns its sesame oil lamps for fewer hours during the long days, but the wicks still char and must be replaced. The steward ordered a bundle of 50 wicks, each a thin twist of rush fiber dipped in a solution of salt water and dried to slow burning, from the same oil merchant who supplied the rain lamps in the 4th month. The price was 10 copper cash for the bundle. You write the entry quickly: lamp wicks, rush fiber, 50 pieces, and the price, and then you add the final verification circle of the morning, small and perfect next to the figure. With the 7th entry complete, you set down the brush and lean back from the desk. The page before you holds the record of a household preparing for a festival that comes every year, a repetition of purchases and traditions that will unfold exactly as they always have. The bamboo platform built and dismantled, the poems written on the 7 sheets of paper and offered to the stars, the 7 colored threads tied to a branch of the plum tree to wish for skill in weaving, the 7 melons eaten in the cool of the evening, their rinds fed to the ox at the gate. The expenses are modest, the ritual unchanged, and your role in it is simply to mark the numbers down. The afternoon is upon you now, and the heat has become a weight that presses against your eyelids. You perform the closing rituals in the same order as always. Rinse the brush in the water bowl until the water runs clear. Dab it on the cloth and reshape the tip. Rest it on the porcelain stand. Wipe the inkstone, tip the waste liquid into the pot, wrap the ink stick, and tuck it into its case. Close the ledger, align the pages, place the paperweight. Each movement is slow and deliberate, your body moving through the pattern without thought, and when the last task is done, you sit for a moment in the stillness, listening to the cicadas and feeling the heat radiate from the wooden walls. The walk through the corridor is slow, your steps unhurried on the warm planks. You pass the main hall, where a maid is arranging the 7 sheets of poetry paper on the altar, smoothing each one flat with the palm of her hand. You pass the kitchen, where the cook is boiling water for the arrowroot starch, the steam rising in clouds that vanish against the high ceiling. You pass the northern veranda, where the bamboo poles for the viewing platform lean against the wall, waiting for the carpenter's apprentice. And you pass the garden, where the plum tree stands with a new branch stripped of leaves, ready to receive the 7 colored threads when the festival night arrives. As you leave the residence and walk toward the outer gate, a breath of wind stirs the plum leaves, making them rustle with a sound like distant rain. The cicadas pause for a single heartbeat, then resume. The heat presses on, and the afternoon stretches ahead, long and golden and full of the slow, steady hum of summer. The 8th month arrives on a morning when the first cool breath of autumn slips through the open screens and touches your face before the sun has fully risen. You notice it immediately on the walk to the writing chamber. A subtle sharpness in the air that was absent during the heavy, droning days of summer, a clarity that makes the edges of the roof tiles seem sharper against the pale sky. The cicadas still sing, but their chorus has thinned. Where before there were dozens of voices layering into a solid wall of sound, now there are scattered individuals calling from isolated trees, each drone starting alone and fading alone, leaving longer gaps of quiet between them. The garden has begun its slow turn toward autumn. The plum tree still holds its green leaves, but a few at the tips have yellowed, and the moss, which had grown thin and dry during the summer heat, has plumped again with the dew that now collects each morning, heavy drops that slide down the iris leaves and vanish into the dark earth. The wisteria trellis is bare, its last blossoms long since swept away, and in their place hang clusters of seed pods, flat and brown and rattling faintly when the breeze stirs them. The stone lantern wears a cap of dry moss, and a single red dragonfly hovers above its peak, its wings a blur of motion that holds it perfectly still in the air for long, suspended moments before it darts sideways and vanishes. Inside the chamber, the standing reed screen has been folded and leaned against the wall, no longer needed now that the sun's angle has lowered. The celadon vase has returned to its place on the corner shelf, and this morning it holds a single spray of bush clover, its tiny pink flowers just beginning to open, a flower that the poets of the court associate with the arrival of autumn. A fresh bundle of tally sticks rests on the tray, tied with a cord of faded russet, the color of fallen leaves, and beside them a small paper packet contains a sample of the pampas grass tassels that will be purchased for the upcoming moon viewing festival. You settle onto the grass weave cushion, pour the 3 drops of water into the inkstone well, and begin to grind the inkstick in the slow circular motion that has become as natural as breathing. The first tally stick addresses the moon viewing preparations directly, and it is notched for the purchase of pampas grass, the tall, feathery stalks that are arranged in the main hall and on the verandas to honor the autumn moon. The steward's notation indicates that the household ordered 15 stalks of Suzuki, the Japanese pampas grass, from a gatherer who cuts them from the hillsides east of the capital, where they grow in dense, silvery thickets. The 15 stalks were chosen for their height and the fullness of their seed tassels, each one measuring at least 3 shaku from base to tip, with plumes that catch the evening light and glow like spun silver. The gatherer charged 3 copper cash per stalk for a total of 45 cash, and delivered them bundled in a length of old cloth, the roots washed clean and wrapped in damp moss to keep the stalks fresh until they could be arranged in tall ceramic vases. You dip the brush and write, "Moon viewing pampas grass, 15 stalks, Suzuki." Below this, you record the unit price and the total, Then add a note that the vases were already in the household collection, taken from the storeroom and wiped clean of summer dust by a maid, a task so minor it escapes the ledger's monetary columns entirely. The second tally stick shifts from decoration to food, for the moon viewing night requires its own particular dishes prepared and arranged on the veranda where the lady and her attendants will sit to watch the moon rise over the eastern hills. The steward has ordered new round lacquer trays for the serving of dumplings, the small white rice flour dumplings known as tsukimi dango that are piled into pyramid shapes as offerings to the moon and then eaten with sweetened bean paste. The old trays, used for several years, had developed fine cracks in their lacquer surfaces from repeated washing, and the steward determined that this year's festival warranted replacements. The tally stick records the purchase of 4 trays from a lacquerware workshop in the artisan district, each tray measuring 1 shaku in diameter, with a low rim and a smooth, glossy surface of deep red lacquer, the color favored for autumn celebrations. The price was 35 copper cash per tray, for a total of 140 cash, and the workshop required 10 days to apply the multiple layers of lacquer, each one dried and polished, before the next was added. You write the entry carefully. Round lacquer trays, red, 4 pieces, for moon viewing dumplings, and record the price and the waiting period, adding that the old trays were not discarded but moved to the kitchen for everyday use, where their cracks do not matter for the servants' meals. While you write, a breeze stirs the bush clover in its vase, and a few tiny petals, no larger than pinheads, detach and drift onto the desk, landing on the corner of the ledger where they rest without weight. You lift them gently with the tip of your finger and place them in the waste pot, where they join the dried residue of ink and the tiny fragments of paper fiber that accumulate over weeks of work. The third tally stick concerns another provision for the moon viewing night, a drink to accompany the dumplings and the poetry that will be composed as the moon climbs. The steward has purchased a single bottle of sweet rice wine, a small bottle of the type called hitoyazaki, which is brewed quickly in early autumn and meant to be drunk young, before the deeper winter brews are ready. The wine came from a brewer in the northern ward who ferments his rice in cedar casks, adding a small amount of mountain herbs to the mash for a faint grassy sweetness. The bottle is a ceramic flask with a narrow neck and a cork of twisted paper, holding roughly 3 go of wine, and it costs 20 copper cash including the flask, which will be returned to the brewer after the festival for a credit of 5 cash on a future purchase. You record the item, sweet rice wine 1 flask hitoyazaki, for moon viewing. The entry notes the price, the flask deposit and the expected credit, a small detail that matters more for the principle of tidy accounting than for the 5 copper cash. Between entries, the morning light continues its slow transition, the golden tint of early autumn replacing the white glare of summer, and the shadows in the garden lengthen by imperceptible degrees. The red dragonfly has returned to its post above the stone lantern, or perhaps it is a different dragonfly, and it hovers in the same suspended stillness, its body a thin line of crimson against the dark green of the pine branches beyond the wall. The cicada in the plum tree begins a new call, holds it, drops it, and the quiet that follows is longer than the call itself. Now the fourth tally stick turns your attention away from the moon viewing and toward the routine structural repairs that the household undertakes in the cooler months when the wood of the building settles and occasionally shifts. The steward has called a carpenter to inspect a sliding door in the central corridor, a door between the main hall and the northern wing that has begun to catch on its track, scraping against the wooden groove with a sound that disturbs the household's quiet afternoons. The carpenter, a man from the southern ward named Tobe, who has done work for the residents before, found that the door's lower rail had warped slightly during the summer humidity, swelling just enough to bind against the track. The repair involved removing the door from its frame, planning down the swollen edge by a fraction of a sun, and re-oiling the track with a small amount of camellia oil. The carpenter's fee for the visit, including labor and the oil, was 30 copper cash, and the work took roughly the time it takes for a kettle of water to boil. You write the entry, sliding door repair, central corridor, planing and oiling, and record the cost, adding that Tobe also checked the other doors along the same corridor while he was present and found them all running smoothly, charging nothing for the inspection since it required no work. The brush moves through the characters for planing and camellia oil with the same practiced ease as all the others, and the verification circle closes the entry. The fifth tally stick continues the theme of autumn maintenance, this time addressing the paper on two standing screens in the lady's private sitting room. The screens, known as two setat, are single-panel standing partitions used to block drafts or to provide a visual barrier during conversations, and the paper coverings on two of them had grown thin and yellow, with small tears near the lower edges where the maid's brooms had brushed against them over months of cleaning. The steward ordered replacement paper from a papermaker who works with mulberry fibre near the Western Hills, the same maker who supplies the household's writing paper, but in a thicker grade suitable for screen coverings. 2 sheets were purchased, each measuring an arm's span wide and tall, at a price of 12 copper cash per sheet, for a total of 24 cash. The old paper was carefully peeled away, the wooden frames dusted, and the new paper glued in place with a paste made from boiled rice starch, the paste itself coming from the kitchen at no cost. You record the item, standing screen paper replacements, 2 screens, and list the paper cost, adding that the work was done by a maid with a steady hand who has recovered screens many times and who received an extra portion of pickled vegetables with her evening meal, as acknowledgement of the task. By now the sun has risen high enough to clear the eastern roof, and the garden basks in a light that is warm but no longer oppressive, the heat tempered by the dry, clear air of the season. The bush clover in its vase has opened 2 more of its tiny flowers, and the petals that have not yet fallen nod on their slender stems whenever a draught passes through the chamber. You pour a few more drops of water into the inkstone, grind a small fresh pool of ink, and continue. The 6th tally stick is longer than most, for it records not a single purchase but a series of small replacements that the steward has bundled together under the heading of General Household Hardware. The list includes 12 iron nails of the type used for hanging lanterns and securing wooden pegs, purchased from a nail maker near the Eastern Market, who forges them one by one over a small charcoal fire at a cost of 1 copper cash per nail. Also included are 4 wooden pegs of hinoki to replace pegs that had split in the veranda railings, the pegs carved by the carpenter's apprentice at a cost of 2 cash each. Finally, the list notes a single new hinge of forged iron for a small storage cupboard in the kitchen, the old hinge having rusted through during the damp 4th month, and finally broken when a maid opened the cupboard too quickly, the replacement costing 8 copper cash. The total for all the hardware comes to 30 copper cash for the 12 nails, 8 cash for the 4 pegs, and 8 cash for the hinge, summing to 46 cash. You write the heading, Household Hardware, Sundry Items, and list each category on its own line with quantity, unit price and subtotal, then draw a line and write the sum, the arithmetic simple and satisfying in its neatness. Now the 7th and final tally stick for this session addresses a purchase that connects the household to the wider world of the capital's commerce. An order for fresh rush mats for the middle corridor, the busy passage that links the kitchen to the main hall and carries the daily traffic of servants' trays and messages. The existing mats had worn thin in the center from countless footsteps, the woven rushes fraying into loose fibers that caught on sandals and scattered dust along the length of the corridor. The steward ordered 7 new mats from the mat maker who has supplied the household before, each mat woven in the standard size of 1 ken by half a ken. The rushes harvested from the riverbank and dried in the summer sun before being plaited into the tight, even pattern that defines a well-made rush mat. The price was 20 copper cash per mat, for a total of 140 cash, and the old mats were rolled up and set aside to be used as winter mulch in the kitchen garden, where they would gradually decay and enrich the soil. You write the entry, rush mats, middle corridor, 7 pieces, and record the price and the disposition of the old mats, then add the final verification circle of the morning. With the 7 entries complete, you set down the brush and place your hands flat on the desk, feeling the cool, smooth surface of the paulownia wood beneath your palms. The page before you holds the record of a household preparing for one of the year's quiet celebrations, a night when poems will be composed by moonlight and dumplings will be eaten in the autumn chill. But it also holds the record of nails and pegs and paper and mats, the unglamorous necessities that keep the residence standing and functioning. The ledger does not distinguish between the poetic and the practical. Both are ink on paper, both are numbers in a column, both are the texture of a year lived in the slow, repeating rhythm of the seasons. You perform the closing rituals with the same care as always, The brush is rinsed in the water bowl, the tip swirled gently until no trace of ink remains, then dabbed dry and reshaped with your fingers. The inkstone is wiped clean, the waste liquid tipped into the pot, the inkstick wrapped in its oiled paper and returned to its wooden case. The ledger is closed, the pages are lined, the paperweight placed on top, and the tally sticks are gathered, tied with their russet cord, and placed in the cedar box on the shelf, where the year's collection of notched wood has grown into a thick, clattering archive. You rise from the cushion and walk to the window, where the garden now lies in the full golden light of mid-morning. The red dragonfly has finally settled on the tip of a bush clover stem, its wings folded and still, and the cicada in the plum tree has fallen silent, perhaps for the rest of the day. A maid crosses the garden with a broom of bamboo twigs, sweeping the fallen leaves into a pile beneath the plum tree, and the sound of the twigs against the moss is a soft, rhythmic shushing that reaches you as a whisper. The air smells of dry grass and the faint, clean tang of the coming autumn, and you remain at the window for a few more breaths before sliding the chamber door open and stepping into the corridor, where the new rush mats have already been laid, their surface smooth and springy under your sandals, carrying you quietly toward the outer gate. The 9th month opens with a sky of pale, even grey that stretches across the capital like a sheet of raw silk, holding the light in a soft diffusion that casts no shadows. The mornings are cool now, cool enough that you take a moment to rub your hands together before opening the chamber door, and the walk through the garden brings the scent of damp earth and the first few fallen leaves from the plum tree, their edges browned and curling inward like tiny cupped hands. The cicadas have gone entirely silent. No trace of their summer drone remains, only the occasional call of a crow from somewhere beyond the compound walls, and the distant rhythmic thump of the fulling block from the textile workshop, where heavy robes are being beaten to fluff their padding for winter. Today's ledger session differs from all those before it, for the tally sticks in the bundle before you concern not only Lady Shonagon's household, but your own upkeep as well. The steward, in a careful, orderly fashion, has prepared a separate set of sticks that record your bi-monthly stipend and the provisions that sustain you in your work, and these are tied with a cord of undyed hemp twine, distinct from the coloured cords that mark the household purchases. When you arrive at the chamber, the desk has been arranged with the usual implements, and beside them rests a small square of rough hemp cloth, a sample of the fabric issued to you for your attire, folded neatly and weighted with a smooth stone so the morning breeze will not disturb it. You settle onto the cushion, pour water into the inkstone well, and begin to grind the inkstick, the scent of pine soot rising in the cool air, sharper and cleaner than it was in the humid months. The first tally stick in the undyed bundle records your bi-monthly stipend, the payment you receive for your service as court scribe. The contract established at the beginning of your tenure specified that you would receive 5 koku of unhulled rice per full month of work, paid in installments every 60 days to ease the burden on the household granary. The steward's notation confirms that this period's payment amounts to 10 koku of unhulled rice, equivalent to 1 full bale and 2/3, and that it has already been delivered to a small storehouse near your own quarters, a lockable wooden bin raised on stone blocks to keep rodents from the grain. You dip the brush and write the heading, Scribe Stipend, 9th month, 10 koku, unhulled rice. The characters for stipend are simple ones, 2 straightforward ideographs that you've written many times in your career, and the brush forms them without hesitation. Beneath the line, you add a note specifying the location of the storehouse and the date of delivery, then draw the verification circle and set the stick aside. The second stick addresses the rough hemp cloth provided for your attire. The household supplies its scribe with 1 bolt of medium-grade hemp cloth per season, the fabric cut and sewn by a seamstress in the servants' quarters into a simple robe and a pair of trousers suitable for the work. The cloth is plain, undyed, the colour of unbleached wool, with a slightly coarse texture that softens after the first washing. The bolt measures 1 tan in length, the standard unit for a full adult garment, and was woven by a weaver in the northern district who supplies the household's lesser cloth. The cost to the household is 50 copper cash per bolt, a sum that appears in the ledger not because you are charged for it, but because the household must account for all cloth issued from its stores. You write the entry, Scribe's seasonal attire, 1 bolt medium hemp cloth, undyed, and record the valuation of 50 copper cash, adding that the seamstress was compensated with 1 show of polished rice for the cutting and sewing. The same rate applied to the summer sleeping robes recorded in the 7th month. The entry is straightforward, and the brush moves from character to character with the same unhurried pace it has maintained since the 12th month. The third tally stick continues the record of your provisions, this time for the charcoal ration that heats your tiny writing room and the small brazier in your sleeping quarters. The steward has allotted you 1 bundle of charcoal per week for the cold months, each bundle consisting of 10 cylindrical lumps of the type called sumimaru, round charcoal made from saura cypress that burns hot and clean with little smoke. The tally covers 4 weeks of the 8th month and 4 weeks of the 9th, for a total of 8 bundles, each valued 12 copper cash for a sum of 96 cash. You write the heading, Scribe's Charcoal Ration, 8 bundles, cypress round charcoal, and record the value and the period, noting that the bundles were delivered to a small clay pot outside your door by the porter Goro, who received no extra compensation because charcoal delivery falls within his regular duties. The verification circle follows, and the ink dries almost instantly on the cool, dry page. As you set the brush down, you become aware of a distant sound that has been present for some time without your conscious notice. The fulling block from the textile workshop, a heavy wooden mallet striking damp cloth against a flat stone, the rhythm steady and slow. Each thump is followed by a brief pause as the cloth is repositioned, and then another thump, the pattern repeating endlessly like a great, soft pulse somewhere in the depths of the residence. The sound is comforting in its predictability, and it merges with the rustle of leaves outside the window and the occasional bark of the household's small dog, who has found a patch of thin autumn sun near the gate, and lies there without stirring. Now the 4th tally stick returns to the household accounts alongside your own, for the steward has bundled a record of the lamp oil you consume during your evening work. The small oil lamp on your desk, the same type as the rain lamps you recorded in the 4th month, burns sesame oil at a rate of roughly 1/3 of a go per evening, with the wick trimmed low to produce a small steady flame that illuminates the page without flickering. Over the course of the 8th month, you used 1 full show of lamp oil, drawn from the same ceramic jar that supplies the main hall lamps, and the steward has noted the consumption as a household expense attributable to the scribe's work. The oil costs 48 copper cash per show, and you write the entry, Scribe's lamp oil 1 show for evening ledger work, and record the price, adding that the wick was trimmed each night before lighting, a habit that conserves oil and produces less smoke. The 5th tally stick addresses a different kind of maintenance, one that concerns your own writing tools rather than Lady Shumagon's household goods. The brush you use each day has begun to lose its tip, the deer hairs slowly wearing down from months of grinding against the inkstone and dragging across the mulberry paper. The brush maker in the artisan district who supplies the household has provided a replacement tip, bundling a fresh cluster of autumn deer hair, the hair selected from the animal's winter coat for their resilience and fine point, and fitting them into a new bamboo ferrule that attaches to your existing handle. The cost for the replacement brush head is 15 copper cash, a fraction of the price of a full brush, and the old tip was returned to the brush maker to be reshaped into a smaller brush for detail work. You write the entry, Scribe's brush replacement tip, deer hair, and record the price, adding the note about the old tip's reuse, a small act of economy that pleases the steward's orderly mind. Between entries, the light in the chamber shifts by a subtle degree, the grey of the sky separating into lighter and darker bands that drift slowly across the garden like the slow swirling of ink in a water cup. The bush clover in the celadon vase has dropped most of its petals now, leaving only bare, wiry stems with a few pink specks clinging to the tips, and the arrangement looks almost like a winter branch, spare and quiet. You pour a cup of tepid tea from a small pot a maid left on the corner shelf. The tea a pale green, made from roasted barley, its taste mild and toasty, and you drink it in slow, small sips while your eyes rest on the garden's muted colours. The 6th tally stick completes the record of your provisions with the most fundamental item, the water you use to grind your ink. The inkstone's well requires water each morning, and while the amount is tiny, no more than a few drops per session, over the months it accumulates into a measurable quantity. The steward, in his meticulous way, has calculated that you have used approximately 3 go of water from the household well since the 12th month, drawn by the kitchen staff and carried to your chamber in the small ceramic pitcher that sits on the corner shelf. The water itself costs nothing, being drawn from the household's own well, a deep stone-lined shaft in the kitchen garden that has supplied the residents for 3 generations. But the steward records the consumption anyway as a matter of completeness, and the tally stick notes the quantity with a single notch and a character for well water. You write this smallest of entries, scribe's water consumption, 3 go, from household well, and add no price, only a note that the pitcher was replaced once during the year when the original developed catchgake. The cry that the court charged to singing the 7th tally stick in the undyed bundle addresses something you have not recorded before, the inkstone itself, or rather the slow depletion of its water reservoir through evaporation and use. The inkstone is a solid piece of dark grey stone, heavy and durable, and it will last for decades. But the water dropper beside it, the tiny gourd-shaped ceramic vessel you tip each morning, has a limited capacity and must occasionally be refilled. The steward has noted that the dropper's clay is slightly porous, and a minuscule amount of water seeps through its walls each day, leaving a faint dampness on the wooden tray where it rests. This loss is so small it cannot be measured in practical units, and so the tally stick carries no cost, only an observation to be recorded for the sake of complete understanding. You write the entry, water dropper evaporation, negligible, and draw a small line rather than a figure in the cost column, a blank that is itself a kind of information. Now the 8th and final tally stick turns away from your personal provisions and back toward the household's ongoing needs, linking your work to the larger pattern of the residents. It records the purchase of a new supply of paper for the ledger itself, for the 5 mulberry fiber pages that remain in the current book will not suffice through the 11th month when the year's accounts close. The steward has ordered a fresh roll of writing paper from the papermaker near the Western Hills, a single roll containing 20 sheets. The paper made from the inner bark of young mulberry branches, beaten into a pulp and spread on wooden frames to dry in thin, even sheets. The roll costs 70 copper cash, and it will provide enough paper not only for the remainder of this year's ledger, but for the beginning of next year's as well. You write the entry, writing paper, mulberry, 1 roll of 20 sheets for ledger continuation, and record the price, adding that the paper was inspected for holes and thin spots before acceptance and found to be of uniform quality, the surface smooth and slightly glossy, perfect for holding ink without bleeding. With the final entry recorded, you set the brush down and rest your hands on your knees, taking a slow breath that fills your chest with the cool, dry air of the chamber. The page before you now holds evidence of a year's quiet labor seen from both sides. The household's endless, patient consumption of oil and paper and charcoal, and your own small but steady participation in that consumption. The numbers are modest, the sums unremarkable, and yet the ledger gathers them into a shape that makes sense, that turns the scattered moments of a life into a pattern that can be read and understood. The closing rituals begin. You rinse the brush in the water bowl, swirling the deer hair tip until the water runs clear, then dab it dry and reshape the point with your thumb and forefinger, laying it gently on the porcelain rest. The inkstone is wiped clean, the grey residue of the day's grinding lifted away with the damp cloth, and the remaining liquid is tipped into the waste pot, which now holds a thick sediment of evaporated ink that will eventually be scraped out and discarded. The inkstick, its end worn concave from months of use, is wrapped in its oiled paper and returned to its case, the lid sliding shut with a soft wooden click. The ledger is closed, the pages carefully aligned, the paperweight settled on the cover, and the 2 bundles of tally sticks, the dyed and the undyed, are tied separately and placed in the cedar box, their notched surfaces pressed together in the darkness. You stand and walk to the window, where the grey sky has deepened toward a darker slate, and a few drops of rain have begun to fall, tapping sporadically against the wooden veranda and the leaves of the plum tree. The falling block has stopped, and the residence holds a greater stillness now, a hush that seems to wait for the coming rain. The stone lantern in the garden gleams with a faint slick of moisture, and the red dragonfly is nowhere to be seen. Its season ended as quietly as it began. You slide the chamber door open and step into the corridor, where the new rush mats installed in the 8th month still feels springy and fresh beneath your sandals, their woven surface faintly glossy in the dim light. The walk toward the outer gate takes you past the kitchen, where the evening broth has begun to simmer, its savory steam drifting through the half-open door. You pass the servant who tends the well, a young woman who has just drawn a bucket and pauses to nod as you walk by. And you pass the small storehouse where your 10 koku of unhulled rice wait in their wooden bin, a quiet promise of sustenance that asks nothing of you but to be counted and remembered. The rain begins to fall in earnest just as you reach the outer gate. Its sound a soft, steady patter on the tiles above your head. And you pause for a moment beneath the eaves, watching the drops darken the gravel path, before stepping out into the cool, clean air of the 9th month's first true rain. The 10th month begins with a sound that has not been heard in the residence since the 4th month, though this sound is softer, drier, and far more scattered. The rustle of fallen leaves stirring across the gravel path, lifted by a cold breeze that slips through the garden with no particular destination. You hear it as you walk to the writing chamber, in the grey light of early morning, the leaves skittering ahead of your sandals like small brittle messengers, their colours ranging from pale gold to deep russet to the dark brown of old tea. The plum tree is now more bare than covered, its remaining leaves a few tenacious flags of amber trembling on the highest branches, and beneath it a carpet of fallen foliage has begun to accumulate, muffling the moss and softening the edges of the stone path. The cold has arrived in earnest. Your breath fogs in the air as you cross the garden, a small cloud that vanishes quickly behind you, and the sleeves of your robe, the new one made from the undyed hemp cloth recorded in the 9th month, feel welcome and necessary against the chill. The sliding screens in the corridor have been partially closed again, reducing the garden view to narrow vertical slices of grey and brown, and the reed screen has been brought back from its summer storage and placed against the eastern wall to block the draughts that now creep along the floorboards. Inside the chamber, a maid has relit the brazier for the first time since the 5th month, and the familiar scent of charcoal smoke drifts in a thin, lazy ribbon toward the ceiling, warming the air and bringing with it a sense of closure, of the year's wheel turning toward its end. A fresh bundle of tally sticks waits on the tray, tied with a cord of dark brown, the color of damp bark, and beside them rests a small sample of the cotton stuffing that will fill the new winter cushions. You settle onto the cushion, which has been changed back to the thicker hemp cloth of the cold months, and you pour the 3 drops of water into the inkstone well, watching them tremble slightly from the chill before they settle. The ink stick feels cold to the touch, and you warm it for a moment between your palms before beginning the grind. The circular motion slower than in summer, the ink releasing its dark bloom with a faint, clean scent that mingles with the charcoal smoke and the dry, papery smell of fallen leaves. The first tally stick addresses the household's most pressing cold-weather need, padded winter robes. The summer hito garments were put away at the end of the 8th month, aired and folded and returned to their Paulonia chests, and now the heavy, insulated robes known as watajinu must be brought out, inspected, and in some cases replaced. The steward's notation indicates that Lady Shonagon required 2 new padded robes for the coming winter, each one made of 3 layers, an outer shell of figured silk twill in a pattern of falling maple leaves, a middle layer of raw silk padding stuffed between the layers, and an inner lining of plain white hemp for comfort against the skin. The silk was woven in the household workshop by Otisaru, the labor recorded elsewhere, and the cotton padding was purchased from a merchant who brings it down from the northern provinces where cotton is grown in small sheltered fields. The tally stick records the purchase of 4 kin of cotton padding at 30 copper cash per kin, for a total of 120 cash, and the addition of 2 bolts of the figured silk twill valued at 80 cash each, for another 160 cash. The hemp lining came from the household stores. The total cost recorded for the 2 robes, excluding the weaver's labor, comes to 280 copper cash. You dip the brush and write, "Winter padded robes, 2 figured silk and cotton," and beneath this you list the materials, their quantities, and their prices. Then draw a line and write the sum. A note below records that the robes were sewn by a seamstress who worked for 4 days and was paid with 2 show of polished rice and a bundle of dried persimmons. The mention of dried persimmons connects to the second tally stick, which is notched with a count rather than a purchase, for the household has its own persimmon tree in the kitchen garden, a tree that produces flat, pale orange fruits that are peeled and hung from the eaves each autumn to dry into a sweet, chewy winter food. The tree bore heavily this year, and the kitchen staff hung 140 persimmons on long strings of twisted rice straw. The strings looped over bamboo poles suspended from the eaves of the kitchen shed and the storehouse. The persimmons must be counted and recorded so the household knows its winter food supply, and the steward's stick notes that 140 fruits were hung, with an expected loss of 10 to 15 from birds and wind, leaving a projected yield of roughly 125 dried persimmons to be taken down in the 12th month. You write the entry. Dried persimmons 140 hung, estimated yield 125, and add a note that the peeling and stringing was done by 3 kitchen maids over 2 days, their labor compensated with an extra cake of pounded rice each. The cost negligible. The brush forms the character for persimmon with its many strokes, and you take a moment to ensure the count is correct, for food stores are the foundation of the household's winter security. While you write, a gust of wind rattles the sliding screens, and a single brown leaf, carried through some invisible gap, skids across the floor of the chamber and comes to rest against the leg of the desk. You leave it where it lies, a small reminder of the season, and continue. The third tally stick records the purchase of new floor cushions stuffed with cotton, replacements for the sitting cushions in the ladies' private quarters and the main hall, where the household receives occasional visitors even through the winter. The old cushions had grown thin and lumpy from use, their cotton stuffing compressed into hard wads that no amount of beating could fluff back to softness. The steward ordered 6 new cushions from a cushion maker in the eastern ward, each cushion a square of roughly 1 shaku per side, covered in a dark blue hemp cloth and stuffed with a full kin of fresh cotton batting, the same northern cotton used in the winter robes. The price was 25 copper cash per cushion for the labor and the cover fabric, with the cotton price separately at 10 cash per kin, for a total of 35 cash per cushion, summing to 210 copper cash for the set. You write the entry, floor cushions cotton stuffed 6 pieces, and list the unit cost and the total, adding that the old cushions were unstuffed and their cotton spread on the garden soil as a winter mulch, a practice that returns the fiber to the earth slowly. The fourth tally stick turns to a structural alteration that marks the cold season as definitively as the padded robes and the cotton cushions. The closing off of the northern veranda with wooden shutters. The northern side of the residence faces away from the sun and receives the full force of the winter wind, and every 10th month the household erects a set of wooden shutters along that veranda, shutting out the cold and transforming the walkway into a dark, quiet passage used only for storage during the winter months. The shutters, made of lightweight sooky wood planks framed with cypress, are stored in the tool shed during the warmer months and must be inspected each year before installation. The tally stick records that 4 of the shutters required new wooden pegs, the old pegs having shrunk and fallen out, and that 2 shutters needed their lower edges planed down where dampness had caused slight swelling. The carpenter's apprentice who performed the repairs was paid 20 copper cash for a morning's work, and the shutters were then hung by the porter and a kitchen hand, their labor falling within regular duties and requiring no extra compensation. You write the entry, northern veranda shutters, repair and installation, and record the carpenter's fee of 20 cash, noting that all 24 shutters were successfully fitted and that the veranda is now closed until the 3rd month of the coming year. Between entries, the chamber grows dimmer as a cloud passes over the sun, and the brazier's glow becomes the brightest point in the room, its orange heart pulsing beneath the grey crust of ash. You reach for the iron tongs and add 2 fresh lumps of charcoal, placing them carefully so they catch the remaining heat, and the flames spring up after a moment, tiny and blue at the base, orange at the tips. The warmth spreads outward in a slow wave, and you hold your hands above the brazier for a few breaths before returning to the desk. The 5th tally stick concerns a purchase you have not recorded before, one that speaks to the season's ailments and the household's quiet provision against them, medicinal herbs. The autumn and winter months bring colds and coughs, and the kitchen staff prepares a simple remedy of dried herbs, boiled in water and sweetened with a small amount of honey, served hot to anyone in the household who develops a sore throat or a persistent chill. The steward has purchased a supply of herbs from an apothecary in the central market, a woman who gathers wild plants from the hills and dries them in her small shop. The tally stick records 4 types of herbs sorted into small clay pots: dried ginger root for warming the body, dried mint leaves for clearing the head, dried licorice root for soothing the throat, and dried chrysanthemum flowers for reducing fever. Each pot contains roughly 1 ryo of dried material, and the cost per pot is 8 copper cash, for a total of 32 cash for the set. You write the entry: medicinal herbs, 4 types, 1 ryo each in clay pots, and list the herbs and their prices, adding that the pots were placed on a shelf in the kitchen dry storage, labelled with slips of paper in the steward's own handwriting, and that the honey used for the remedy comes from the household's own hive, tended by the gardener. The mention of the gardener draws your eye to the window, where the garden has faded into a composition of grey and brown, the only colour a few red berries on a bush near the southern wall, and the dark green of the pine branches visible over the roof. The gardener has been at work, for you can see the neat piles of fallen leaves gathered around the bases of the shrubs, left to decay into the soil over the winter. The dragonflies are gone, the butterflies are gone, the bees are gone, and the garden has entered its quiet season, a time of rest and waiting. Now the 6th tally stick brings your attention to the daily delivery of firewood, the most fundamental of the cold weather provisions. The household burns a large quantity of firewood in the kitchen hearth, the bathhouse stove, and the braziers scattered throughout the residence, and the fuel merchant from the southern gate delivers a cartload of split logs each morning before dawn, the ox cart creaking up the service path while the household still sleeps. The tally stick records the deliveries for the first 20 days of the 10th month, each day's delivery weighed on a simple balance scale that the steward checks by counting the bundles. Each bundle weighs 5 kin, the standard weight for firewood in the capital, and the cost is 4 copper cash per bundle. The household takes 6 bundles per day on average, though the steward's notation shows some variation: 5 bundles on warmer days, 7 on days when the bathhouse is heated. The total for the 20-day period comes to 120 bundles, for a weight of 600 kin and a cost of 480 copper cash. You write the entry: firewood delivery 10 bundles daily average, 120 bundles, and record the weight and the cost, adding a note that the firewood is oak and chestnut mixed, cut from the hills south of the capital and aged for 6 months to burn slow and hot. The arithmetic of the firewood takes time, for the daily tallies must be added carefully, and you check the sum twice, running your finger down the column of figures while your lips move silently. The numbers are correct, the total matches the steward's notation, and the verification circle closes the entry with a small, neat stroke. The 7th and final tally stick for this session returns to the subject of food stores, recording a count of the pickled vegetables that the kitchen has prepared for the winter. The household grows radishes, turnips, and cucumbers in the kitchen garden, and each autumn, the kitchen staff layers these vegetables in large ceramic jars with salt and rice bran, pressing them down with heavy stones and leaving them to ferment in the cool darkness of the storeroom. The tally stick records that 6 jars of pickles were prepared in the 9th month, 2 jars of pickled radish, 2 jars of pickled turnip, 1 jar of pickled cucumber, and 1 jar of mixed vegetables. Each jar holds roughly 1/2 of pickles, a volumetric measure equivalent to about 18 liters, and the salt used for the pickling was purchased from the same salt merchant who supplied the purification salt in the 1st month. The cost already recorded in that entry. You write the heading, winter pickles, 6 jars, and list the contents of each jar, adding a note that the pickles were tasted by the cook on the 15th day of the 10th month and found to be fermenting properly, with a pleasant sourness developing. The brush moves slowly for this entry, the characters for the different vegetables each requiring their own distinct combinations of radicals and strokes. With the pickles recorded, the day's entries are complete. You set the brush down and look at the page, where the neat columns of black characters record the household's methodical preparation for the cold robes and cushions, shutters and herbs, firewood and food, each item a small bulwark against the coming dark months. The page has a satisfying density to it, the lines closely spaced but clearly separated, the red category marks dotting the margins like small autumn leaves themselves. You perform the closing rituals now with a particular care, for the year is drawing toward its close, and the ledger must remain perfect through its final pages. The brush is rinsed in the water bowl, swirled until the last trace of ink diffuses into the water, then dabbed on the cloth and shaped. the deer hair tip coming to a fine point that you test against your fingertip. The inkstone is wiped clean, the day's residue removed from the well on the grinding surface, and the remaining liquid is tipped into the waste pot, which has grown heavy with sediment over the months and will soon need its own emptying. The inkstick, worn down by a third since the 12th month, is wrapped in its oiled paper and tucked into its case, and you note with a small private thought that you will need a new inkstick by the middle of the coming year. The ledger is closed, the pages are lined, the paperweight settled on the cover, and the tally sticks are gathered, tied with their dark brown cord, and placed in the cedar box, where the collection of notched wood has grown into a thick, rattling archive that represents the entire year's expenses. You rise from the cushion and walk to the window, where the garden now lies in the dim, flat light of late afternoon. Dusk comes early in the 10th month, and already the shadows have swallowed the stone lantern and the persimmon tree and the bare branches of the plum, leaving only the grey sky visible above the roofline. The 140 persimmons hang from the eaves in their long, still rows, their orange colour deepening to rust in the fading light, and the shutters on the northern veranda stand closed and silent, doing their quiet work against the wind. You slide open the chamber door and step into the corridor, which is darker now than it was in the morning, the paper screens glowing faintly with the last of the outside light. The residence is quiet, its inhabitants already settled into the slower, more inward rhythm of winter evenings. You pass the kitchen, where the great iron pot bubbles with the evening broth, and you pass the storeroom, where the 6 jars of pickles sit in their dark corner under their heavy stones, their contents slowly transforming in ways that will not be tasted for months. At the outer gate, the cold air meets you sharply, and you pause to pull your robe tighter before stepping onto the path, the fallen leaves crunching under your sandals with a sound like the rustle of old paper, like the turning of a page that is yet to be written, but will be, soon, when the 11th month arrives, and the year's accounts come to their gentle, quiet end. The 11th month arrives on a morning when the garden wears frost like a thin, white shawl draped over every surface, and the sky above the capital is a pale, watery blue that holds no warmth. You walk to the writing chamber with your breath streaming behind you in small clouds, your sandals leaving dark prints in the frost that will melt as the weak sun climbs. The plum tree is entirely bare now, its branches stark against the sky, and the moss beneath it crunches faintly underfoot, frozen stiff. The stone lantern wears a cap of frost, and the persimmons that hung from the eaves in the 10th month have been taken down, leaving only the bare strings of rice straw swaying in the cold breeze. Inside the chamber, the brazier glows with a steady warmth, and a maid has placed a fresh bundle of tally sticks on the tray, these tied with a cord of faded indigo, the last bundle of the year. The celadon vase on the shelf holds a single branch of winterberry, its red berries, small and bright against the pale wall. You settle onto the cushion, pour the usual 3 drops of water into the inkstone well, and begin to grind the inkstick, which is now worn down to a stub, its end deeply concave from months of use. The ink releases its dark blue more slowly than it did in summer, the cold making the water reluctant to accept the soot, and you grind for longer than usual, your wrist moving in steady circles, while the charcoal smoke from the brazier drifts around you in thin, lazy ribbons. The first tally stick of the 11th month is different from all the others you have handled this year, for it does not record a purchase or account, but rather announces the beginning of the annual closing. The steward's notation reads simply, Year-end Summary of Household Expenses, 11th Month, Chotoku Era Year 1. Beneath this heading, the stick is notched with a reminder of the categories to be totaled: firewood, fabric, food, festival trinkets, repairs, wages, and sundries. You open the ledger to a fresh page, the last page of the current book, and you write the heading in slightly larger characters than usual, the brush moving with a deliberate slowness that marks the importance of the task. The second tally stick is actually a bundle of smaller sticks, all the category totals that the steward has calculated during the preceding months, now gathered together for transcription into the final summary. You begin with firewood, for it is the largest and most constant expense. The tally shows that over the course of the year, from the 12th month through the 11th, the household has purchased firewood in varying amounts according to the season. Light bundles in summer for the kitchen hearth alone, heavy bundles in winter for the braziers and the bathhouse. The steward has summed the totals, 480 bundles recorded in various entries, at an average cost of 4 copper cash per bundle, for a firewood total of 1,920 copper cash. You write the line firewood, annual total 480 bundles, 1,920 copper cash, and the brush traces each numeral with the precision of long practice. The next category is fabric, encompassing all the cloth, thread, dye and garments purchased or produced during the year. The steward's calculations are dense. The Azuki bean red dyeing from the 5th month, the summer hito robe from the same month, the winter padded robes from the 10th month, the scribe's own hemp attire from the 9th, the silk for the New Year dancing girls payment, the cotton padding, the willow green dye, the sleeve repair from the very first day of the ledger. Woven through these are the bolts of silk, the lengths of hempen cloth, the small purchases of thread and ribbons, and the boxwood comb. The steward has converted all payments into copper cash where possible, and the total for fabric and clothing comes to 865 copper cash, with an additional 12 bolts of medium-grade hemp cloth and 3 bolts of fine silk recorded separately for transactions where cloth was the currency. You write the line, fabric and clothing annual total 865 copper cash, plus 12 bolts medium hemp, 3 bolts fine silk, and beneath it, you add a subsidiary note that the household workshop produced an additional 17 bolts of various fabrics that were not purchased and therefore carry no cost. The third category is food, the vast and varied record of everything the household has consumed or stored over the year. The steward's summary breaks it into subcategories: rice purchases, including the 45 koko of unhulled rice for the New Year mochi and the regular monthly deliveries from the lady's estate; festival foods, including the tanabata melons and the moon-viewing dumplings and the arrowroot starch for cooling cakes; preserved foods, including the dried abalone from the 4th month and the dried gourd strips from the 6th and the winter pickles from the 10th; and small sundries like the salt for prasolingetekam. And then since brown, the rice alone accounts for the largest share, but the steward has tallied everything, and the total for food, excluding the rice that came from the estate, amounts to 642 copper cash and 45 koko of unhulled rice. You write the line carefully, the characters for provisions taking up more space than the simple word food ever could. Between categories, you pause to rest your hand, for the writing is dense and the brush must remain steady. You pour a small cup of hot water from the iron kettle and hold it in your palms, the warmth seeping into your fingers. Outside the window, the frost has begun to melt from the stone lantern, leaving dark patches of damp on the grey stone, and a single crow flies across the garden with a slow, heavy beat of its wings, calling once before it disappears over the roof. The fourth category is festival trinkets and ceremonial expenses, the smallest but most colourful of the annual totals. Here the steward has gathered the tanabata offerings of paper, ink, cakes, threads, and melons, the moon-viewing pampas grass, lacquer trays, and sweet rice wine, the New Year dancing girl and her supplementary rice cakes, and the purification salt from the 1st month. The total for festivals and ceremonies comes to 311 copper cash, plus 3 bolts of hemp cloth for the dancing girl and the small bundle of rice cakes. You write the line festivals and ceremonies, annual total, 311 copper cash, 3 bolts hemp cloth, and you add a note that the bamboo for the viewing platform and the clay for the altar were drawn from household stores and carry no recorded cost. The 5th category is repairs, the steady, unglamorous record of the household's physical persistence. The steward's tally includes the tatami edging from the 2nd month, the sliding screen peg from the same month, the rain lamp oil from the 4th month, the leak repair with clay and rags from the 4th month, the sliding door planing from the 8th month, the standing screen paper from the 8th month, the standing screen paper from the 8th month, the northern veranda shutters from the 10th month, and half a dozen other small mends recorded across the month. The total for repairs comes to 403 copper cash. You write the line, structural repairs and maintenance, annual total 403 copper cash, and the brush moves with a quiet satisfaction. For this category, more than any other, speaks to the simple ongoing work of keeping a house standing. The 6th category is wages and labor, the record of the people who have worked for the household over the year. The steward's tally includes the worm-tender Sada's 6 koku of unhulled rice, the seamstresses who mended sleeves and sewed robes, the carpenter and his apprentice, the porter Goro and his extra meals, the maids who aired garments and strung persimmons, the dyer Yosaburo, the fan maker, the tatami maker, the mat maker, the weaver Otu Saru and her extra payments. Where labor was compensated in food or cloth, the steward has noted the equivalent value in copper cash, and the total for wages comes to 350 copper cash and 8 koku of unhulled rice. You write the line, wages and labor, annual total, 350 copper cash, 8 koku unhulled rice, and you add a note that the household's permanent servants receive their regular stipends from a separate account not included in this ledger. Now, the most particular category, the one that concerns you alone. The scribe's provisions. The steward has gathered your bi-monthly stipends, your charcoal ration, your lamp oil, your water dropper evaporation, your brush replacement tip, your hemp cloth attire, and the paper for the ledger itself. The total for the scribe's upkeep over the year comes to 161 copper cash, 10 koku of unhulled rice, and 1 bolt of hemp cloth. You write the line, scribe's provisions, annual total, 161 copper cash, 10 koku unhulled rice, 1 bolt hemp cloth, and the characters for your own title feel strange to write, as though you were recording a person you know only from the outside. With all the categories recorded, you now face the final task, the grand total. You lay the brush down for a moment and take up a fresh tally stick, using it to check your arithmetic by running the pointed end down each column of figures. Firewood, 1,920. Fabric, 865 plus cloth. Food, 642 plus rice. Festivals, 311 plus cloth. Repairs, 403. Wages, 350 plus rice. Scribe, 161 plus rice and cloth. You add them slowly, mouthing the numbers, and the sum resolves into a clear figure, 3,652 copper cash, 63 koku of unhulled rice, 16 bolts of medium-grade hemp cloth, and 3 bolts of fine silk. You dip the brush and write the final entry of the year in slightly larger characters, centered on the page. Grand total of household expenses to Toko era year 1, 3,652 copper cash, 63 koku unhulled rice, 16 bolts medium hemp cloth, 3 bolts fine silk. Beneath this, you add a single line in smaller script, recorded and verified by the court scribe on the 28th day of the 11th month. The verification circle count that follows at the afternoon has faded while he worked, and the light through the paper screens has dimmed to a deep grey blue that speaks of approaching dusk. The brazier still glows, and the winterberry branch in its vase casts a faint, distorted shadow on the wall. You set the brush down and place your hands flat on the desk, feeling the cool wood beneath your palms, and you take a long, slow breath that fills your lungs with the scent of charcoal and ink, and the faint, clean cold of the winter air. The closing rituals that follow are the last of the year, and you perform them with a measured deliberateness that acknowledges the occasion. You rinse the brush in the water bowl until the water runs entirely clear, then dab it dry and reshape the tip with your fingers, testing the point against your thumb, before laying it on the porcelain rest. You pour the remaining water from the inkstone well into the waste pot, then wipe the stone with the damp cloth, removing every trace of ink from its surface until it gleams in the lamplight. The inkstick stub, small enough now to fit entirely within your palm, is wrapped in its oiled paper for the last time and tucked into its wooden case, and you make a note on a small slip of scrap paper that a new inkstick will be needed by the 2nd month of the coming year. The ledger, now complete, must be closed for the final time. You align the pages carefully, smoothing them flat with the palm of your hand, and you check that every entry has its red category mark, that every column of figures adds correctly to its subtotal, that every verification circle is present and round. The book is full, its mulberry pages covered from edge to edge with the record of a year's expenses, and it feels heavier now than it did in the 12th month, heavier with the weight of ink and time, and the accumulated small choices of a household going about its life. You place the paperweight on the cover, the smoothed river stone that has held the pages flat through every month of the year, and you rise from the cushion, your legs stiff from the long sitting. The chamber is quiet, the brazier's embers settling into their final glow, and you stand for a moment looking at the desk where you have spent so many hours. The inkstone, the brush, the water dropper, the waste pot, the cedar box of tally sticks now full to its lid, the completed ledger resting beneath its stone. You walk to the window and look out at the garden, where dusk has nearly arrived, the sky a deep, even grey that holds no moon and no stars. The stone lantern stands dark, the plum tree is a silhouette of bare branches, and the moss is invisible beneath its covering of frost. There is no wind, no bird, no sound at all except the faint crackle of the brazier behind you, and the distant, almost inaudible murmur of the kitchen fire. The garden is waiting, as it always waits, for the snow to come and for the year to turn, and for the first green tips of the willow to appear in the distant second month. You turn from the window and cap the inkstone with its wooden lid, a small, final act of closure. You rinse your hands in the water bowl, the cold water shocking against your skin, and you dry them on the cloth. Then you lift the completed ledger from the desk, holding it in both hands, and you place it on the shelf beside the cedar box of tally sticks, aligning it carefully with the other books that contain the records of previous years. The shelf holds 5 ledgers now, each one a year of expenses, and yours joins them quietly, without ceremony, a book among books. The chamber door slides open with a soft, familiar sound, and you step into the corridor, which is dark now except for the faint glow of a single oil lamp at the far end where the main hall begins. You walk slowly, your sandals silent on the rush mats, and you pass the kitchen, where the great iron pot has been scrubbed clean and hangs on its hook, the fire beneath it banked for the night. You pass the storeroom, where the winter pickles ferment in their jars and the dried persimmons wait in their bamboo basket. You pass the ladies' sitting room, where the new purple ribbon still binds the curtain cord to the hook, and the 2 round fans rest in their stand, their ink landscapes invisible in the darkness. At the outer gate, you pause and look back at the residence, its roof a dark curve against the deeper dark of the sky, its windows glowing here and there with the soft light of braziers. A year has passed within these walls, a year of charcoal and silk and rice and rain and festivals and repairs, and all of it now rests in the ledger on the shelf, still and silent. You turn away and walk through the gate, the frost crunching under your sandals, and the night closes around you like a blanket, quiet and cold and full of the promise of sleep.